Tyrion Lannister stood before the towering gates of Winterfell with a flutter in his heart he would never have openly admitted. The carriage ride north had been long and cold, every jolt on the rough King's Road sending a throb through his stubby legs and a weariness into his spine. Still, he had come this far, and he would endure more discomfort if it meant delivering himself to what he once would have considered an unthinkable destiny. Tyrion Lannister, Lord of Winterfell. There was a certain poetry in it, or so his quicksilver mind liked to quip whenever he felt the chill creep under his fine cloak. He had been, after all, the imp of Casterly Rock, the least esteemed son of Tywin Lannister, the one child who could never properly continue the Lannister legacy to his father's satisfaction. Yet here he stood, on the brink of forging his own name, not in the southern sun but in the northern snow. His marriage to Sansa Stark, once a cruel twist forced upon them by politics and Lannister cunning, was at last being revisited under far different circumstances. The world had changed since that forced ceremony in King's Landing, where each tried to conceal fear behind courtesy, each trapped in their own misery. But war and tragedy had reshaped them both. Kings had risen and fallen, armies had swept over the land like locusts, and monstrous threats from beyond the wall had redefined everyone's priorities. In the aftermath of that upheaval, Tyrion had discovered that sometimes people were capable of forging new bonds, even ones that politics had once so callously demanded. And Sansa Stark, no Sansa Lannister in the eyes of the law, had come into her own like steel pulled from the forge. He refused to let himself fantasize over how the North would receive him. It was not that he believed the North had any great love for him or for Lannisters in general. He simply knew that, to them, Sansa was a Stark, the daughter of Ned Stark, with more legitimacy than half a dozen Southern kings combined. If she now chose to uphold her marriage to him, if she consented to stand beside him as his wife not merely by name but in truth, then all their old resentments and grudges would be tested. And Tyrion, never one to rely on illusions, had prepared himself for the coldness of their stares, the bitterness that might well up among the lords of the North. But for better or worse, this was the path they were taking. The events leading to their renewed union had been shaped by quiet negotiations. Letters carried by Raven back and forth, diplomatic overtures from what remained of House Stark, and an ever-shifting tapestry of alliances as the new generation of leaders tried to bring stability to the realm. With the Targaryen threat resolved, or at least transformed into something different than it once was, and the Lannisters' old power base in the west overshadowed by new alliances, Tyrion had found himself unexpectedly free to orchestrate his own future. And for Tyrion, that future had come to rest on a single question: could the dwarf of Casterly Rock find solace and purpose at the side of the red-haired Stark who once endured so many cruelties in the capital? He had found his own answer in the quiet hours after the largest battles were done, staring into a guttering candle as the wind howled outside. He had written to Sansa, addressing her with the courtesy of a distant friend, acknowledging the strangeness of their situation. The first letter, he imagined, must have surprised her. But the reply had come swiftly enough, a single parchment acknowledging the alliance and her grudging acceptance of exploring it further. She was, in truth, as uncertain as he was, but also weary of the endless turmoil. House Stark needed stability in the north, and she recognized that gods, it humbled Tyrion to consider he was one of the only living Lannisters with enough cunning, resourcefulness, and capacity for compassion to offer genuine partnership rather than tyranny. When finally the notion had been raised that perhaps it was time they truly recognized the validity of their marriage made under duress once but never officially annulled, Tyrion had summoned all his bravery to journey north. He might still receive a frosty reception, or, seven hells, a reception that might drive him south again in the middle of the night. But he had come. For better or worse, for sickness or health, in war or in peace, the vow was real, and he would give himself to the north if it would have him. The carriage came to a stop, and Tyrion dismounted carefully, taking a moment to test his legs, which were stiff from the journey. He looked up at the old stone walls, gray and proud. The wind whistled through the crenellations. Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, a place of centuries of tradition. Could he dare think of himself as its future lord? Only time would tell. The gates opened to admit him and his small retinue, a handful of men-at-arms sworn to him personally, no more than half a dozen, and a couple of servants. He had not wanted to come in force, lest the North interpret that as aggression. The courtyard was a swirl of crisp northern air and motion, stable boys guiding his carriage to a place of rest, men in stark livery glancing at him curiously as though examining some rumored beast that had stepped out of a story. Tyrion felt their eyes on him. He knew the rumors that preceded him: Tyrion the dwarf, Tyrion the twisted lion, Tyrion the cunning Lannister with a silver tongue and a thirst for wine. But if any recognized him, they made no sign beyond stiff bows and brisk courtesy. He made his way forward, stepping gingerly in the lightly snow-dusted yard, letting his gaze sweep over the towers that soared above. The great keep rose at the far side, windows glimmering with torchlight. Winterfell's old godwood stood beyond it, a quiet realm of ancient trees. As he walked, Tyrion's heart pounded. He would not lie to himself that he was calm. He forced his face to remain impassive, or at least polite. A swirl of fur and red hair caught his eye near the entrance to the great hall. Sansa. He couldn't help the faint quiver in his chest. He had not seen her in far too long, outside of that fleeting glance on a distant battlefield, or in illusions conjured by memory. She stood waiting for him, a handful of guards behind her. But in truth, all he could focus on was her face. Tall and willowy, draped in the furs of the north, her hair braided with a dignity that seemed to declare that she was indeed a Stark of Winterfell. She was no longer the frightened young girl he had married in King's Landing. There was a gravitas to her, a quiet command. And yet, when she looked at him, he could see the flicker of old memories. That day they were forced into a ceremony that neither of them had wanted. The awkwardness, the heartbreak, and also the surprising moments of compassion between them. Tyrion recalling how he refused to consummate the union, though it would have pleased his father. He had not forced himself on her, had even tried in his clumsy way to treat her gently. That memory had stayed with Sansa, he suspected, and had grown into something that might yet be trust. "Sansa," he said, his breath swirling in the cold air. He took a step forward, and she inclined her head. Her expression was calm, perhaps carefully so, but not unkind. "Lady Stark," he amended, a gentle note in his voice. "Or perhaps I should say Lady Lannister. Which do you prefer?" Her lips pressed together in something that might have been close to a smile, though it was tinged with the formality of the moment. "Sansa Stark," she said softly. "But we both know what the papers say, don't we?" "We do," Tyrion replied, letting the corners of his mouth curl. There was a glimmer of shared understanding. Whether she used the name Lannister or Stark mattered far less than how she intended to stand by him. "I appreciate you welcoming me here." "Welcome is a strong word," she said quietly, so that only he might hear. Then, in a louder voice, she said, "Come inside. The wind is fierce tonight, and the great hall is warmer." Tyrion nodded, not offended by her remark. Welcome would indeed be tested. He followed her, steps half as long as hers, but he kept pace with surprising vigor. The great hall had lost none of its grandeur. Long tables, high ceilings, and a dais at the far end. Torches and braziers shed warmth and light. Stark banners were unfurled in the rafters, and Tyrion's mind went back to his first visit to Winterfell, so many years ago, when he had traveled north with King Robert. That seemed another lifetime. Now he was no mere curious guest come to gape at the wall. Now everything was precarious. So many memories, so many regrets, so many possibilities. They stood by one of the large hearths. The flames danced, the glow reflecting off Sansa's face. He let his gaze linger on her, not with lust, but with a quiet admiration for how much she had endured and how much she had grown. He felt a tremor in his heart, a pang of guilt for the Lannister name and what it had brought her, but also a surge of determination. If he was to be anything in her life, let him be a shield rather than another tormentor. She spoke with the clipped courtesy of one expecting multiple ears. "You are weary from travel. A meal will be prepared for you and your men. We'll speak on what we must later." Her eyes flickered over the hall, landing on the few northern lords who lurked near enough to observe them. "Is that acceptable?" He bowed, wincing inwardly at the stiffness in his back. "Of course, my lady." The old, formal words came to him automatically. "I bow to your graciousness." Then softer, his voice for her alone. We've much to discuss, indeed. Sansa turned away, and Tyrion watched as she beckoned a steward, who promptly made arrangements. He was led to a set of chambers in the guest house, ones that had been made comfortable with a brazier burning merrily to ward off the biting northern cold. He could not help the thought. Would he be moved to the Lord's chambers if all went to plan? Or would that be too presumptuous for him to even imagine? He sighed and shrugged off the question for now. He settled on a high-backed chair, a goblet of strong wine in his hand, to thaw himself after the journey. He told himself that this moment was crucial, the threshold between his old life and what might be a chance at real meaning, real partnership. The North might never love him, not wholeheartedly. Too many scars from Lannister malice. But if Sansa could find it in herself to trust him, that would be enough to endure the chill stares. Perhaps they could build something new, something that defied all the cruelties that had come before. Dinner was served in a smaller hall reserved for important guests, a cozy space where the flicker of candles cast dancing shadows on the table. Tyrion noticed that while some of the lesser northern lords or stewards were present, Sansa herself came only after the initial courses had been laid out. She slipped in quietly, her long skirts rustling. He stood to greet her, though his motion was hardly graceful, and she nodded for him to resume his seat. They sat near one another, though not quite side by side. Her eyes lingered on him every so often, as if evaluating whether his presence felt right in her ancestral home. He did much the same, though with Tyrion's usual gift for reading subtleties. Their conversation was perfunctory at first, bland pleasantries about the road conditions, the rumor of wild game in the Wolfswood, and so forth. The tension in the air was a tangible chord thrumming between them. What happened next would shape both their destinies, but the watchers in the hall demanded civility. After the meal, Sansa rose. "We'll speak privately," she said, dismissing the onlookers. A few of the North's faithful advisors began to speak up, but she held up a slender hand and they fell silent. She led Tyrion through corridors to a smaller solar and intimate chamber with a single table and tall windows looking out onto the courtyard. Once the door closed, the hush between them was profound. She faced him and her composure slipped just enough that he could see Sansa the person, not Lady Stark. "Tyrion," she said simply. "Sansa," he answered, letting the weight of the moment rest. He clasped his hands. "I know what I'm asking, Izzy." She sighed, stepping closer, but not close enough to be within casual reach. "You are asking me to affirm that the marriage we once despised is now something real. Something I might rule by your side with." Her voice did not quite quiver, but he could sense the swirl of conflict behind her words. "The North will not easily accept a Lannister as consort in Winterfell. I need to know your intentions." He met her gaze, mindful of how earnest she seemed. "I want to do right by you, Sansa. There was a time I dared not hope for anything good for myself, but for you, especially after all you endured at the hands of those who bore my name, I would give everything I have to ensure you are safe, your people are safe, and that no harm might come to you again." Her eyes flickered, a faint tremor in her lips. "Your words always came easily, Tyrion. I remember that. But I also remember you were the only Lannister who treated me with kindness when I was cornered by lions in King's Landing." He inclined his head. "I have no illusions that my last name is a boon here. But my mind, my ability to navigate the labyrinth of politics, those might serve you well. Serve the North well." She turned to the window, gazing at the snow that swirled in the courtyard. "Winterfell has had too many ghosts, too many tragedies. I've lost count of how many times it's been taken, burned, reclaimed. The North needs stability now more than ever. The people look to me for guidance as one of the last Starks in Winterfell. My brother Bran is no lord, and Rickon," she paused, sadness crossing her face at the memory of her youngest brother's fate. "Arya will never settle for the role of Lady of Winterfell if she remains in the North at all. Jon has his own path, his own burdens. That leaves me. And so the North expects me to stand strong, to provide a future. They want me to marry, to secure alliances, to produce heirs that are half Stark. They want a future that keeps the North proud and safe." Tyrion heard the unspoken question in her words. "Why should that future be with you?" He stepped nearer, feeling the chill of the window's draft. "Because I believe I can help you protect everything dear to you," he said, his voice low. "Because I care for you in my own small way, even if that must grow into something deeper over time. Because we both have been battered by this world, both seen cruelty. Yet we still stand. We survived." And perhaps, if we choose each other consciously this time rather than by force, we might find a small measure of happiness in it. She turned to him, assessing. A hush stretched between them before she spoke again. Happiness, she echoed as though testing the word on her tongue. I never thought to hear that word from a Lannister's mouth in Winterfell. But you're not like them. She studied him, the flickering light from a single candle dancing on her pale cheeks. Tyrion, if I do accept this, if I proclaim you as my husband in truth, it cannot be half measures. The North will need to see that we stand together, that we share authority. You must embrace the North's ways, the old gods, the traditions. You must stand beside me and show yourself worthy. Because there are many who will scheme against you or who will see only a chance to break House Stark entirely. I cannot afford to be naive again. He bowed his head in solemnity. I understand. No illusions. His mind was already racing with the complexities that would swirl around them. But he felt a determination set in his heart. I am yours to command, Lady Stark. Or do you prefer I call you wife? He tried to give a wry smile at that, but it came out a bit more earnest than he intended. She didn't smile back exactly, but there was a small softening in her face. We'll see. For now, let's walk forward cautiously and present a united front in public. The details of your position, your acceptance among the lords of the North, and how we handle the ceremonies, those can be hashed out. But we can begin by telling them that we remain man and wife, and that we intend to make Winterfell a place of peace, not further strife. Tyrion let out a small breath of relief. The first hurdle was passed. She had not sent him away. She had not scorned him publicly. There was a moment in which he sensed that, beneath the steel of her demeanor, she was still the girl who had dreamed of courtesy and chivalry, who had wanted a gallant knight to rescue her. The world had taught her that gallant knights were often illusions, but perhaps, in her own strange way, she had come to appreciate a dwarf with a sharp mind over a tall knight with a honey tongue. In the following days, news spread through Winterfell. Tyrion Lannister was here, the imp, the one who had once worn the hand of the king's pin. Whispers of the demon monkey and twisted lion flitted around, but so did the recollection that Tyrion had tried to champion the innocent at times, that he had defied his own family when it mattered. Sansa did not hold formal audiences on the matter right away, but she let the lords guess. Only after a few days of careful conversations, with Tyrion quietly meeting several key retainers of House Stark, men who would do anything for Sansa's protection, did she at last convene a gathering in the Great Hall. Tyrion stood at her side, dwarfed by her height, as she announced that, by law, by the vow sworn in King's Landing, she and Tyrion remained wed. She acknowledged that in the confusion of the wars, many assumed it was annulled or undone, but it had never been so. We have both decided, she proclaimed in a clear voice that resonated in the hall, that the alliance is to remain and be honored. Lord Tyrion Lannister, in the absence of other claimants, shall stand with me as Lord of Winterfell. A hush had fallen. Tyrion could feel the disquiet ripple. One northern lord, known for his gruff ways, stepped forward to protest. My lady, with respect, how can a lion rule the wolves' den? Winterfell is Starkland, and Sansa's head snapped toward him. She was not unkind, but she was firm. I remain the Lady of Winterfell. No man shall rule here without my blessing. Tyrion Lannister is my husband, and I ask that you respect that. He has sworn himself to me and to the North's welfare. Let us not forget the times he took up arms to defend the realm against the White Walkers. Let us not forget how he was once among the first Lannisters to act with any kind of decency toward us. Tyrion did not speak. He let Sansa command, as she needed to show strength in her own seat. But he did allow himself a small nod to the crowd. That was the key, he thought, to prove to them he was not there to usurp or destroy, but to protect and serve. He could feel the tension radiating from the lords, but also a kind of reluctant acceptance. Sansa Stark was the Stark in Winterfell. If this was her decree, how could they openly rebel without turning on her? He bowed his head slightly. My lords of the North, he said, I understand your doubts. I come not to bring Lannister oppression. My father is gone, my sister is gone, my brother is, well, the world is a different place. I come only to stand with my wife, if she will have me, and to devote my mind and my strength to the needs of the North. Some remained unconvinced, but they kept their peace. Sansa was satisfied by their silence, reading it as tacit acceptance, if not approval. As the days became weeks, Tyrion realized that acceptance would not be won simply by a speech. He would have to integrate himself into the life of Winterfell, into the northern ways. He would have to show them that, however improbable, he could be a worthy consort. He threw himself into the tasks of administration. He was skilled at reading ledgers, balancing accounts, ensuring that shipments of grain were properly tallied, that the blacksmiths had enough iron to keep forging arms for Winterfell's defenses. He listened intently to advisors who understood the North's terrain, the problems of harvest in such a cold climate. Whenever he faced a challenge, he brought it to Sansa first to confirm her preferences. Quietly but steadily, he offered suggestions that streamlined trade with White Harbor, ensuring that goods came in from the ports. He reached out to the Glovers, the Manderleys, the Serwins, and others to see what troubles they faced in the post-war land. To his amusement, he discovered that the best way to break ice with the northern lords was often to share a strong drink near the hearth, to speak bluntly, and to prove that his wits were not overshadowed by pride. Few of them had ever encountered a Lannister who was willing to set aside arrogance long enough to admit wrongdoing in the past. Tyrion did so openly. "I know House Lannister's name is tarnished in your eyes," he would say, and not without reason. "But the shape of things changes, and so must we." Some nights, after such gatherings, Sansa would find him slumped in a chair in his solar, swirling a cup of wine. "So, how goes your campaign for the hearts of the North?" she asked once, a half-smile ghosting her lips as she regarded him from the doorway. He rubbed his temples wearily. "They're a stubborn lot." Then, with a sly grin, "It's almost admirable if one ignores the glowering. They love you, you know. Even the ones who doubt me. They just fear that I don't know, corrupt you somehow or tie the North once more to southern intrigues." Sansa stepped closer, folding her arms. "You intend no such thing, do you?" He shook his head. "No. I've had enough of King's Landing to last me 3 lifetimes. If it were up to me, the entire Red Keep would become a museum of folly, a lesson in how not to govern." She allowed a laugh, soft but genuine, and it lit her face in a way that Tyrion found unexpectedly beautiful. This was no simpering child but a woman who had learned how to find a scrap of humor in the bleak world around her. Her eyes met his. "Then perhaps we'll turn the tide of sentiment eventually." She paused, the next words hesitant. "I'm grateful for your help, Tyrion. You've made the accounts simpler, the supply lines smoother. I see how hard you're working, and I appreciate it." Warmth spread through him, though he tried not to show it too plainly. "I only do what any loyal consort should do." He hesitated, then ventured gently, "Sansa, has anyone questioned you directly about us?" Her cheeks colored slightly. "They have. They wonder if we're truly together as man and wife, or if it's merely a ploy." Her gaze slipped away. "The North is old-fashioned. A marriage is supposed to be consummated, sealed, produce heirs." The last word hung between them. Tyrion felt a pang in his chest. He had never forced that question before. He had told Sansa he would not touch her without her consent, and she had not offered it. Now, the circumstances were different. If they were to be truly recognized, if the lords of the North were to accept him, they might demand proof of an heir in time. He exhaled slowly. "And what do you tell them?" Her eyes flicked back to his, and for a moment vulnerability danced across her face. "I tell them that it is none of their concern, that our private lives will remain our own. But I know that eventually, if we are to solidify this union," she did not finish, but he could see the swirl of emotions, a swirl of fear, of sense of duty, of uncertain curiosity. He reached out and took her hand, gingerly. She allowed the contact. "Sansa, I have never demanded anything of you. I will never demand anything of you. If it should come to that, let it be a mutual choice, not an obligation." He tried to inject reassurance into his voice. "The realm has demanded enough from you already." She squeezed his hand ever so gently. "Thank you," she breathed. Then she pulled away, clearing her throat as though returning to business. "Come, let's speak of tomorrow's council meeting." But Tyrion could see that a step, however small, had been taken toward bridging their past and forging a future. A turning point came one afternoon when a group of bandits, remnants of roving Sells-wards, threatened a northern village. Sansa consulted with her advisors. Tyrion urged a firm but strategic response, a show of force to protect the roads and quell any illusions that the North was weak. The suggestion led to the assembly of a small armed party to head out and address the threat, with one of Sansa's captains at the helm. But as they prepared to depart, Sansa surprised everyone by announcing that Tyrion would accompany the men, representing House Stark as consort. Murmurs rippled through the courtyard. Some whispered that he would be a liability, given his stature and rumored lack of prowess on the battlefield. But Sansa insisted. Tyrion did not protest. He knew what she intended. He would demonstrate to the North that he was not afraid to stand for them, that he was more than just a cunning man counting coins. So he donned padded armor and furs, mounted a stout northern pony. He loathed riding full-sized horses, for they made him feel childlike, and rode out of Winterfell beside the men. The journey was arduous, the cold biting. They set up camp near the threatened village and scouted the bandits. Tyrion was no skilled swordsman, but he could hold a crossbow decently, and his wit was sharper than any blade. He worked with the captain to lay an ambush. The skirmish that followed in the gray dawn was quick but fierce. Tyrion felt his pulse hammering as he loosed a bolt that took one of the bandits in the leg. The captain's men charged. Steel met steel, and yells echoed across the frost-hardened fields. Tyrion did not try to be a hero. He stayed back enough to keep from being overwhelmed, but he was present, participating. By the time the bandits lay dead or captured, Tyrion's blood roiled with adrenaline. The men saw him reload that crossbow with steady hands, saw him hold steady under danger. Later, washing the smell of blood and sweat from his hands in a half-frozen stream, Tyrion noted the respectful nods of the soldiers. He might never be one of them, but they recognized he had joined them rather than cowering behind them. It was a subtle but important shift in how they viewed him. When they returned to Winterfell, word had already traveled ahead that Tyrion had fought for the North. Nothing grand, but enough to show he was willing to risk himself. Sansa gave him a long, appraising look that evening, and though she said little, her eyes shone with a quiet approval. Over the weeks that followed, Tyrion began to sense a slow thawing of the North's hostility. Certain lords who once stood at the edges of the Great Hall during gatherings now approached him with small concerns or friendly remarks. He responded with courtesy, wit, and the occasional self-deprecating jape. His skill with words, so often scorned by those who couldn't follow his quick tongue, seemed to find a grudging appreciation here. The North might be blunt, but they also respected sincerity and Tyrion's brand of humor. Equal parts honesty and cheek often elicited a rare chuckle. And Sansa, she was the axis around which his world turned. Each day, they sat side by side in council sessions, weighing decisions about trade, the training of the garrison, the forging of alliances with minor houses. Each night, they might share a goblet of wine or speak quietly near the hearth, sometimes about matters of the day, sometimes about their shared memories, sometimes about nothing in particular. She remained guarded, but he saw glimpses of a woman emerging from the shell of tragedy, a woman who cared deeply for her home and for those who stood by her. She asked him once what it was like to grow up with his father's scorn, and he found himself telling her stories he had never told another soul. She listened with a somber sympathy, and in that moment, they found a kinship in being the overlooked children of great houses. Their closeness did not go unnoticed. Rumors spread that Lady Stark, Lady Lannister, spent her evenings with her husband behind closed doors. The specifics were unknown, but it fueled the sense that they were a real union, not a political farce. Some who had once doubted them began to relent, if only to keep up with the wind's shift. Others remained skeptical, watching for any sign that Tyrion might betray Winterfell. Yet no betrayal came. Each passing day knitted him more tightly into the fabric of life there. At times, Tyrion wondered how life might have been had fate not tossed them together. Would Sansa have found a kindly northern lord with no shadow over his name? Would Tyrion have wasted away in some distant exile or died at the hands of his sister's cruelty? Whatever might have been, it was overshadowed by the truth of what was. They were married, allied, forging something that, against all odds, felt genuine. One evening, an especially bitter winter wind rattled the window panes of Winterfell. Tyrion sat in his solar, reading by candlelight, his toes practically resting in the embers of the hearth. A gentle knock sounded at his door. Surprised, Sansa typically summoned him to her own solar. He stood and opened it. She stood there, draped in a shawl, eyes seeming uncertain. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice subdued. "Of course." He stepped aside, feeling an odd rush of anticipation. She entered, glancing around the room, taking in the books and scrolls scattered on the table. She looked at him, and in the dim glow, he saw her cheeks were slightly flushed, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from something else. "Tyrion," she began, folding her hands together as if unsure what to do with them. I've been thinking about the future, our future. There's a feast planned next week to celebrate the harvest. It's the first good harvest since the war. The lords and ladies of the North will gather here, and I think it might be time for us to step forward as husband and wife in earnest. His breath caught in his chest, but he kept his tone calm. What exactly do you mean? She moved closer, so close that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. I mean that if we are truly building a new era for House Stark, and yes, for House Lannister in the North, then it's time I made it clear to everyone. Not just in words, but in deed. By the old ways, a marriage is recognized in spirit when the bride and groom share a cup and consummate the union. The day in King's Landing was forced. I had no choice. You had no choice. But we have a choice now, and we are making it. We can affirm that union, or we can continue to let people whisper. Tyrion studied her face. She was nervous, but there was determination there too. She was not a frightened girl, but a woman choosing her path. You are certain this is what you want? He asked quietly. We don't have to bow to the demands of rumor or the demands of tradition, if it pains you. She breathed in deeply. At one time, yes, it would have pained me to think of being with a man who wore the name Lannister. But you've shown me a different path, Tyrion. I won't pretend I'm entirely without fear. My life has taught me caution, but I trust you. And if we are to truly stand as Lord and Lady of Winterfell, I think we should do it wholeheartedly, not half. I want there to be an heir of both Stark and Lannister blood. An heir who might bridge these once feuding houses. That's my choice now. Emotion welled in Tyrion's chest, hope, gratitude, a poignant ache for all that had happened to bring them here. He reached for her hands gently. Then, my lady, I am honored by your choice. Truly. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss there. He felt the slight tremor in her fingers, but also her resolve. She let out a small breath as though releasing some tension. We'll hold the feast in a week. That night, I want you to join me in my chambers. We'll seal our vows ourselves on our terms. There was a quaver in her voice, a mixture of anxiety and longing to reclaim her own agency. He nodded. On our terms, he repeated softly. The days leading up to the harvest feast were a blur of preparation. Sansa oversaw the decorations, the arrangement of tables, the feast's courses. Tyrion assisted in ensuring guests from across the north and beyond had safe passage. Ravens flew out and replies came in. Some northern houses still harbored deep resentment, but the chance to gather in Winterfell for a peaceful celebration after so much war drew them in. The great hall was soon adorned with garlands of pine and holly, tokens of the approaching winter. The day of the feast dawned cold and bright, the sky a piercing blue. Tyrion dressed in finery of deep crimson lined with black fur, a subtle nod to his old house but a more somber palette than the typical Lannister red and gold. He wanted to avoid any gaudy display that might remind them too keenly of Cersei's cruelty. He pinned a new sigil on his breast, a wolf and a lion conjoined, a discreet symbol of the union between Stark and Lannister. He had ordered its forging by a local smith, an attempt to unify the heraldry rather than flaunt Lannister dominance. When he entered the great hall, it was already alive with music, the smell of roasted meats, and the buzz of conversation. Lords, ladies, knights, and soldiers packed the space, a colorful array set against the dark stone walls. Tyrion felt the heat of so many bodies and fires, a welcome reprieve from the chill outside. He scanned the crowd, noticing both suspicious glances and curious ones. The tension was not gone, but it was muted under the revelry. Many had come simply eager for a night of good food and drink. At the far end, Sansa descended the steps from her seat. She wore a gown of pale gray, trimmed with white fur, her red hair woven in a crown-like braid. She looked every inch the Lady of Winterfell, regal and poised. As she moved through the throng, guests parted to let her pass, bowing or curtsying. She approached Tyrion with a composure that masked any nerves she might feel. He bowed in return, kissing her hand before they turned to ascend the dais together. 2 seats stood side by side, each draped with direwolf pelts. It was not a throne, but a place of honor for the Lord and Lady of Winterfell. Sansa raised her hands for silence. The hall quieted. The minstrels ceased playing. Her voice carried, "My lords, my ladies, good people of the north and honored guests. Tonight, we come together to celebrate this harvest, to give thanks for the land's bounty and the respite from war. Winter is always on our doorstep, but so is the resilience of our people. Let us eat, drink, and remember our bonds with one another." She paused, letting her eyes sweep the room, then continued. "We also come to affirm a bond that, though forged in the chaos of war, stands strong today. I speak, of course, of my marriage to Tyrion Lannister." A low hum of murmurs traveled the hall. Some had expected an announcement, but not so plainly stated. Tyrion sat still, letting Sansa's voice fill the space. "I know it may not be what some of you would have wished," she said, "but I ask that you look to what he has done for Winterfell since he arrived, how he has lent his mind and his courage to our cause. In a realm hungry for peace, he has been an ally, not an enemy." She turned to him and extended her hand. Tyrion rose, taking it. He addressed the crowd, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. "I understand that trust is earned, not given. I vow to continue earning yours, each day. In honor of the harvest, let us share in the fruits of peace. Let the wolves and the lions rest beside one another." Sansa nodded, then beckoned to the minstrels, who began playing once more. The crowd relaxed, conversation and laughter resuming. Tyrion resumed his seat, and servants swarmed with trays of food. Roasted boar, spiced carrots, steaming loaves of bread, honeyed pastries, and pitchers of strong ale and wine. A long night of revelry stretched ahead, and Tyrion intended to pace himself. He had no desire to become sloppy in his cups in front of the entire North. He and Sansa engaged in polite talk with the lords seated nearest them, sampling the meal. As the evening wore on, Tyrion exchanged banter with Lord Glover about the best tactics for fortifying coastal villages. Sansa occasionally rose to greet guests who came to pay their respects. The mood grew merrier, the music louder, as the hall filled with the glow of torches and the haze of shared company. Eventually, as the feast reached its crescendo, Tyrion felt Sansa lean toward him. Her face was warm, from either the wine or the closeness. She softly said, "Come with me." He hesitated only a moment before nodding. She stood, and he followed, weaving through the hall. A few in the crowd noticed, curious, but none stopped them. She led him away from the noise and the bustle, through a side door into the dim corridors of Winterfell. The music receded behind them, becoming a muffled hum. Her hand in his was steady but cool. She said nothing until they reached the corridor leading to her chambers. There, she paused, turning to face him. In the torchlight, her eyes glimmered with uncertainty and determination in equal measure. He reached up and gently brushed a loose strand of red hair from her cheek. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She exhaled, her breath faintly scented with the spiced wine of the feast. "Yes," she said. "Tonight is ours, on our terms." They entered her chambers, a spacious room warmed by a blazing fireplace, draped in furs and soft candlelight. She closed the door behind them, and for a moment, they simply stood there, hearts pounding in the hush. He looked at her, seeing not only the polished lady but the sorrow, the strength, the hope that lived in her. He remembered the frightened girl who once tried to hide tears in King's Landing, and he marveled at the woman she had become. Sansa took a step closer, hands moving to rest gently at his shoulders. They were nearly of a height with him, standing on a raised step near the fireplace. The flicker of flames danced across her hair. "I don't know how to be a wife," she murmured, half in apology. "Not in truth. I only know how to survive. But I want to try, Tyrion." He covered her hands with his own. "Nor do I know how to be a husband. I've never truly had that chance. But we can learn together." He leaned in, brushing his lips against her cheek, featherlight, letting her decide how much more. She turned her face toward his, closing the distance. Their first true kiss was tentative, tinged with nerves, but it was genuine, forged by choice. Tyrion felt the softness of her lips, the slight tremble in her breath. He drew back just enough to search her eyes. She nodded, cheeks flushed. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Let's make this real." Words caught in Tyrion's throat, but he managed a soft reply, "Yes, my lady." He let her lead him toward the bed, the furs piled high. They moved slowly, carefully, as if unraveling old hurts with each gentle touch. There were moments of awkwardness, inevitable for two people who had waited through so many horrors, but there was also tenderness. That night, they shared warmth beyond physical contact, a warmth of trust tentatively placed in each other's hands. When dawn came, pale light creeping through the shutters, Tyrion found Sansa still nestled at his side, her breathing soft and even. He watched her for a moment, a swirl of emotions tumbling in his chest. Protectiveness, admiration, and a cautious joy he had scarcely felt before. He knew the days ahead would not be easy, that the North would watch them, that some hearts would remain cold. But in that quiet dawn, with Winterfell's ancient stones around them and the faint caw of ravens echoing outside, Tyrion felt he had found a place to belong. More importantly, they had found a reason to believe in tomorrow. Word of their consummation spread quickly, though no one knew the details. The small changes in how they carried themselves, the subtle closeness between them, the contented cast of Sansa's gaze. It all spoke volumes. Soon, whispers of an heir followed. Though no one could say for sure, the possibility alone fueled new speculation. If a child were born, that child would bear both the blood of the wolf and the lion, uniting two houses once at odds. It was a potent symbol, one that resonated in the great hall, in the yard, among the servants, and across the north. Tyrion embraced the role of Lord of Winterfell more fully now. He oversaw expansions to Winterfell's libraries, sponsoring the copying of old manuscripts on northern history. He helped establish a rudimentary system of beacons for communication across the wide expanses, working with the lords to ensure that if trouble arose again from beyond the wall, they would be better prepared. When the white ravens flew, heralding a change of season, Tyrion took counsel with the wise men of the north to plan for the coming snows. All the while, Sansa guided him, teaching him subtle customs, ensuring his decisions did not clash with centuries of Stark tradition. In turn, Sansa continued to shine as the Lady of Winterfell, benevolent but unyielding in matters that demanded strength. Tyrion saw how her people loved her, and he felt a humble gratitude that she had chosen him to stand at her side. He watched her settle disputes with a calm fairness, saw her console frightened peasants, heard her laugh when a traveling bard performed a silly song. The nights they spent together were not always romantic. Often they pored over ledgers or read letters sent from across the realm. Sometimes they argued, a clash of perspectives or old insecurities rearing up. But always they found resolution, drawn by the realization that they were forging something precious. The trust between them grew stronger. Sansa confided in him about her nightmares, about the ghosts that haunted her from King's Landing. He confessed to her the moments when he still felt unworthy, the echo of his father's voice taunting him as a failure. They comforted one another in the darkness, each learning that healing came from shared burdens. Months passed, and rumors swirled that Sansa Stark might be with child. She had not announced anything, and Tyrion refused to press her on it. But the talk grew as watchers noted that she ate sparingly at feasts, occasionally excused herself from lengthy councils, and once or twice seemed dizzy. When at last she confirmed privately to Tyrion that she indeed carried their child, he experienced a surge of unfiltered joy. Yet beneath the joy lay fear for her health, for the fragile future, for the child's acceptance in a realm that had known so much bloodshed. But one look at Sansa, her smile tentative yet real, and that fear was tempered by hope. They agreed to keep it quiet until the pregnancy was beyond its earliest months, lest fate play a cruel trick. Still, word had a way of seeping out, and soon enough the entire castle was abuzz. The Lady of Winterfell bore a child of a Lannister. How would that child be received? Tyrion braced himself for hostility. But it seemed that, in the time he had spent proving himself, old grudges had softened enough that even the more stubborn lords were eager for continuity, for a new generation to anchor the realm in peace. A great storm raged one night, snow and wind hammering Winterfell. Tyrion had a fire blazing in their chambers when Sansa, wrapped in a thick robe, approached him with quiet eyes. She placed a hand on her stomach. "Sometimes, I wake and wonder if this is real, if it's all just another dream that will vanish." Tyrion carefully pulled her closer, pressing his palm over hers, feeling the warmth beneath. "It's real," he said softly, "and whatever comes, we face it together. The child will be part wolf, part lion, but fully ours." Her smile was laced with relief, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in us, even when no one else did. He closed his eyes, holding her gently as the wind howled outside, the storm raging. Within the walls, they found a bubble of calm, of closeness that neither had known they could have. When the storm passed, news arrived of new challenges. Peace never lasted forever in Westeros. Reports of unrest near the Iron Islands, tensions in the Riverlands, rumors of banditry on some of the trade roads to White Harbor. With winter near, resources would be strained. Tyrion and Sansa gathered the household, drawing up plans for rationing and mutual aid between the northern houses. They consulted ravens from other regions, forging alliances where they could. Tyrion's mind worked tirelessly, anticipating crises, finding ways to minimize them. Sansa's voice gave authority to those plans, her name ensuring that the North followed. Yet through the burdens of leadership, they both found quiet moments to nurture the life growing within her. A nurse was hired, wise in the ways of childbirth. Sansa took daily walks in the Godwood, breathing the crisp air, letting the spiritual calm of the ancient heart tree wash over her. Often Tyrion accompanied her. At times they would stand in silence, hand in hand, simply taking in the rustle of leaves overhead, the hush of snow drifting down. By the time the new year turned, Sansa's belly showed clearly beneath her gowns, and the talk of an heir to House Stark Lannister was on every tongue. Many seemed genuinely hopeful, eager to celebrate a birth that symbolized unity rather than division. Some were more cynical, muttering that a Lannister child in Winterfell was an affront to the memory of Ned Stark. But those voices grew quieter as Sansa made it clear that she would not abide insults to her family present or future. She still had nightmares, sometimes, of that day they forced the marriage in King's Landing, of Joffrey's sneering face. In those nightmares, she was trapped powerless. But in the waking world, she had found power in forging her own destiny with the very man who had once been the lesser of many evils, but now emerged as an unexpected partner. Tyrion, for his part, still wrestled with the deep-rooted sense of not being enough, too small, too flawed, unworthy of the love of a highborn lady. But each day she chose him, and that was a balm to those old wounds. One evening, near the end of winter's harshest grip, Sansa's labor pains began unexpectedly. The castle erupted into activity. Midwives and maesters rushed to her chambers, servants ran to fetch hot water and clean linens, and a hush of anticipation settled over Winterfell's corridors. Tyrion's stomach churned with anxiety as he was ushered away from the birthing room, as was the custom. He paced the halls, biting his lip, ignoring the sympathetic glances of guards and retainers. Hours passed, each minute an eternity. Through the thick doors, he could hear muffled cries, the midwife's calm instructions. Finally, after what felt like an endless vigil, a nurse emerged, beckoning him inside. His heart pounded as he stepped over the threshold. The room was dim, lit by candles, and smelled of herbs and sweat. Sansa lay in the bed, exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with perspiration, but her face glowed with relief. A small bundle rested in her arms. Tyrion approached slowly, his breath catching. Sansa's eyes met his, and she managed a tired smile. "A daughter," she whispered, pulling the blanket aside to show a tiny, wrinkled face. The baby's eyes were tightly shut, but she let out a small sound of protest at being disturbed. Fine tufts of hair crowned her head, hair that looked golden red in the candlelight, a blend of her parents' heritage. He knelt by the bed, feeling tears prick his eyes. He was gentle as he reached out a shaking finger to brush the infant's cheek. She was so small, so delicate, and yet, to him, she was the most miraculous sight in the world. "She's beautiful," he said, voice breaking. He carefully gathered the baby into his arms, mindful of supporting her head, marveling at how warm and alive she felt. Everything else in the world seemed to vanish. Sansa's eyes brimmed with tears, a mixture of pain, joy, and overwhelming emotion. She reached for Tyrion's free hand, gripping it tightly. "We did it," she murmured. "We made something new." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles, nodding, unable to form a proper sentence for a moment. Finally, he managed, "Yes, we did." The child in his arms squirmed, letting out a soft mewl. He chuckled thickly, blinking back tears. "Little Lionwolf," he whispered to her. "May the gods keep you safe." Later, after the maesters pronounced mother and child healthy, word spread across Winterfell that a daughter had been born to Lord Tyrion and Lady Sansa. Joy rippled through the castle, a much-needed moment of hope in a realm that had known so much sorrow. Bells tolled in soft celebration, and in the great hall, people raised cups in toast to the new child who embodied the union of Stark and Lannister. The days that followed were a blur for Tyrion. He balanced the demands of governance with the irresistible pull of staying at Sansa's bedside, watching over mother and infant. He helped name the baby Joanna after Tyrion's own mother, and though Sansa was unfamiliar with the name's origin, she conceded after seeing the tender emotion in Tyrion's eyes. "Joanna Stark Lannister," she said softly, testing it on her tongue. "It has a nice sound." "Thank you," Tyrion murmured, moved that she would honor his mother's memory. He also insisted the baby have a proper Stark name in the tradition if Sansa wished, but Sansa shook her head. "We can weave these traditions together. She is both of us." When at last Sansa had recovered enough to receive visitors, the great hall opened to celebrate the infant's introduction. Many came bearing gifts: a carved wooden dire wolf, a small golden lion figurine, blankets embroidered with both sigils. Tyrion stood by Sansa's side as she held the baby, greeting lords and ladies who offered their blessings. He caught glimpses of genuine goodwill and a sense that maybe, just maybe, the North was ready to accept him as their lord, if only because they loved Sansa and now they loved the child. He saw old Lord Wyman Manderly chuckling as he peeked at the baby, exclaiming that she had the Lannister nose but Stark eyes. He saw lesser lords bow respectfully, some pressing a kiss to Sansa's hand, some giving Tyrion nods that were no longer so stiff. There were still a few who hung back, uncertain, but their numbers were fewer than before. A new era might truly be dawning, Tyrion thought. And it all hinged on the strange, fragile alliance that had grown into something real and cherished. That night, when the halls had quieted, Tyrion found himself back in their chambers with Sansa and Joanna. Sansa rocked the baby gently, humming a northern lullaby Tyrion had never heard. The child drifted off to sleep in her mother's arms. Tyrion watched, heartful, hardly believing that this was his life now. He remembered how he'd once been so certain he would die in some corner of Casterly Rock, unloved and unremembered, a footnote in his father's grand legacy. Instead, here he was, forging a legacy of his own, built on partnership, respect, and dare he call it love? Sansa carefully laid Joanna in the small cradle that had been placed near the fire, then turned to Tyrion. She sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. He joined her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, letting out a contented sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked softly, resting an arm around her shoulders. "For being brave enough to come here. For working tirelessly to show the North you weren't a threat. For caring for me when you had every reason to stay away from anything involving House Stark. For giving me a child who blends our families in a way that might heal old wounds. For so many things." He stroked her hair gently. "You don't owe me thanks, Sansa." He searched for the right words. "I did what I wanted to do, not what I was forced to do. You gave me a chance to be more than I ever believed I could be. Maybe we've both saved each other, in a way." She tilted her head up, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Yes, perhaps we have." They sat like that for a time, the hush of the room broken only by the faint crackle of the fire. Tyrion felt the beat of his own heart, steady and sure, and in that warmth he sensed that the ghosts of the past were receding. They would never vanish entirely, but they no longer defined the present. He and Sansa had made a new story for themselves, an improbable, beautiful story born from war and sorrow but blossoming into hope. When at last they parted for the night's rest, Tyrion paused by the cradle, gazing down at Joanna, the tiny face peaceful in slumber. He reached a finger out and she reflexively curled her miniature hand around it. He swallowed hard, emotion threatening to spill over. "I swear," he whispered to the baby, "I will protect you. I will protect your mother, and I will protect this home. Even if the world turns upside down again, I will stand as your shield." Sansa came up behind him, resting a hand on his shoulder. He turned to her, and she nodded, her face solemn and full of quiet conviction. He smiled. Together, they would face whatever storms came next. For now, Winterfell was at peace, and the child of Tyrion Lannister and Sansa Stark slept safely in the cradle of a new era. In the following seasons, that new era took root. The North prospered under careful management. Tyrion's administrative skills meshed with Sansa's insight into the northern temperament, creating a balance rarely seen in such feudal lands. Visitors from other regions began to acknowledge Winterfell's growing influence and, indeed, stability. Some even half-joked that the king in the south should look to the wolf and the lion in the north for lessons in governance. Tyrion never let that flattery go to his head. He knew how precarious peace could be. But each time he saw the people of the north rallying behind Sansa, each time he saw the guards of Winterfell greet him with respectful nods, each time he felt Joanna's tiny arms clinging to him when he held her, he allowed himself a measure of pride. Pride that they had built something worth protecting. Sansa's personal growth was equally profound. No longer forced to wear a mask in a hostile court, she blossomed in her own castle. She grew confident enough to arbitrate disputes without hesitation, wise enough to listen to counsel when needed. She commanded the loyalty of her bannermen not through fear but through respect. Her nights of terror had lessened, replaced by moments of calm reflection with her husband by her side. Once, many months after Joanna's birth, they walked together through the gardens that had been replanted in the courtyards of Winterfell, a sign of renewal. Snow dusted the dormant rose bushes and the air nipped at their cheeks, but Sansa insisted on the walk to breathe fresh air. Joanna, now able to babble and cling to her parents with curious hands, was carried in a sling at Tyrion's chest. The sight was comical but endearing, the dwarf lord wandering through the snowy garden with a ginger-haired infant bouncing gently against him. Sansa chuckled at one point, pausing to adjust the sling so Joanna's wide eyes could see the world. "I never thought I'd see this," she mused. "Tyrion Lannister at Winterfell, carrying my child, strolling with me like a family on a calm afternoon." He smiled. "Neither did I. But the gods have a sense of humor, wouldn't you agree?" She linked her arm with his, leaning her head against him as they continued. "Maybe it's not just humor. Maybe it's grace, or destiny, or the will of the old gods who watch over these lands. Either way, I'm glad for it." Joanna gurgled, her little hands flailing as if to join the conversation. Tyrion patted her head, letting her grab his thumb. He thought of how, once, he had dreaded fatherhood, certain that any child of his would be scorned or ridiculed. But seeing this little girl, half Stark and half Lannister, so full of potential, changed that dread into hope. He glanced at Sansa. "Would you like more children one day?" he asked, his voice gentle. She considered, her cheeks coloring slightly at the question. "Someday," she answered, nodding slowly. "But I'm not in a rush. Joanna is enough to keep us both busy for now, don't you think?" He laughed softly. "Indeed, she is quite the handful already." And so they walked on, forging a path that would have seemed impossible in the days when their marriage was just another cruel twist of politics. Through shared trials, mutual respect, and the simplest acts of kindness, they had discovered a love that was neither forced nor fleeting. And in that love, they found the strength to guide Winterfell into a new season, one where the bitterness of old rivalries was slowly thawed by the warmth of a family's devotion. Thus Tyrion Lannister, once the outcast imp of Casterly Rock, became Lord of Winterfell through marriage to Sansa Stark. But more than titles or politics, what defined him in the North was the way he chose to stay, to learn, and to protect those who had once feared his name. And in return, Sansa Stark, once a timid girl trapped in a nest of vipers, found the partner she never expected. The one man who valued her not as a pawn, but as a woman who deserved dignity and respect. Together, they forged a legacy that would echo across the snow-swept plains, reminding the world that even in a land scarred by betrayal and bloodshed, hope could still bloom in the frosty air. They would face challenges in the years to come, new threats and old grudges. But whenever the wind howled outside, or the darkness seemed poised to return, Tyrion would recall that fateful day he had entered Winterfell's gates, uncertain of his welcome. He would recall the vow he made, to protect this land and its lady with every whit in his mind, every beat of his heart. And he would look at Sansa, standing tall with her red hair shining like embers, a child at her side who bore the proud heritage of both wolf and lion, and he would know they had done the impossible. They had remade their story. They had chosen each other, and in so doing, chosen a future bright with possibility. That was the gift they had earned, through pain and perseverance. A gift neither Lannister gold nor Stark honor alone could provide, but which together had become something far greater. A promise that winter might come, but spring would follow, and in that spring, new life would always find a way to grow. Tyrion Lannister woke to the scent of pine logs crackling in the hearth and the subdued glow of early morning light seeping through the shoe. Terse, Winterfell still slumbered at this hour, wrapped in layers of frost and silence, but his mind had already begun to stir with the challenges of the day. He could feel the gentle weight against his side and realized Sansa had fallen asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. Joanna, their daughter, breathed softly in the cradle just a few steps away. For a moment, Tyrion allowed himself the solace of simply existing in that space, Sansa's warmth, the distant echo of the winter wind brushing the castle walls, and the realization that, against all logic and expectation, he had found a place in the north. When at last Sansa stirred, she blinked awake and gazed at him with that soft, calm acceptance he had come to cherish. Her hair was in slight disarray, her cheeks faintly flushed by the heat of the fire. It made her look years younger, a reminder that beneath the mantle of Lady of Winterfell, she was still, at heart, simply a woman who had learned to survive and to love. "Good morning," she whispered, voice husky with sleep. She followed his gaze to Joanna. The little girl still slumbered, cradled in furs to ward off the northern chill. "I hoped she'd rest a bit longer." He brushed a stray lock of red hair from Sansa's forehead. "You should rest longer too. I know how little sleep we both had these past weeks." Indeed, the demands of parenthood had been ceaseless, especially in a realm that still needed so much rebuilding. "I could stay and watch over her. No reason to rush." Sansa pushed herself upright with a gentle smile. "We have a council this morning, Tyrion. The lords from 3 lesser houses, Long, Slate, and Lake, are set to arrive before midday, and they've traveled far to address concerns about the harvest stipends. We shouldn't keep them waiting." Tyrion sighed, though not without fondness. His mind turned to the ledgers he had pored over the previous night, disputes about land boundaries, tariffs on trade goods through White Harbor, and rumors of bandits around the last hearth. Even after the wars, the realm never seemed to run out of complications. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stretched. "Of course, the burdens of leadership wait for no one, but perhaps we can ensure they're offered a hearty meal upon arrival. It's a long ride from their lands in this cold." She stood, gathering her robe around her, and moved to check on Joanna. The baby stirred, fists curling, but drifted back to sleep the moment she felt her mother's gentle hand. Sansa leaned down and placed a soft kiss on the child's forehead. A tender ache rose in Tyrion's chest at the sight of mother and daughter, Stark and Lannister joined. Soon, he found himself in the solar, dressed in practical northern garb, a doublet of thick wool in subdued black and gray, subtle Lannister colors woven into the trim. A small, combined sigil of the wolf and the lion was pinned at his breast. He pored over the day's schedule with a quick, methodical eye, sipping a mild spiced wine that chased away the morning's chill. In the corridor just beyond, he heard the swirl of footsteps as maids readied the hall for the arriving guests, and stable hands bustled about, preparing fresh feed for the riders' horses. Sansa joined him a short while later, having left Joanna in the care of a trusted nurse. She wore a gown of soft gray wool trimmed in white fur. She was no longer the timid girl who once peered anxiously around every corner for hidden threats. Her posture was regal, her eyes focused with quiet confidence. Yet her face softened in a private smile when she caught Tyrion's eye. He offered his arm, and together they walked to the great hall to greet their visitors. The 3 lords arrived together, shoulders dusted with snow. They bowed respectfully to Sansa and, with only the slightest hesitation, to Tyrion as well. Months ago, that might have been a stiff, reluctant gesture at best. Now it was tinted with genuine deference. The North had slowly come to accept that Tyrion was more than a cunning outsider. They recognized the stability he and Sansa had built. Sansa, always courteous, led them to a smaller council chamber off the great hall rather than the main dais, an intentional choice that signaled a more intimate discussion. They settled around a long oak table, a fire crackling in the hearth at one end. Servants poured warm cider and offered fresh loaves of bread as well as thin slices of salted pork. For a time, the lords busied themselves with drinking and thawing their hands before the flames, while Tyrion observed them. He noted that Lord Slate had gained weight since the last time they'd met, likely a sign that his harvest was less poor than rumored. Lord Long kept glancing around, perhaps unused to being inside Winterfell's walls. Lord Lake was the quietest of the 3, eyes keen. Tyrion suspected he was the one who had orchestrated this joint visit. When at last the lords seemed ready, Sansa set down her cup, folded her hands, and gestured for them to speak. Lord Lake cleared his throat and began, "My lady, we come with concerns. We appreciate the fair allotment of the harvest among the smaller houses, but we fear the winter's depth. We have news from travelers that the snows will be heavier than expected. The King's Road may be impassable for weeks at a time, which could hinder essential trade. We would ask if Winterfell can hold additional stores on our behalf or arrange a more consistent supply route from White Harbor." Lord Slate promptly chimed in, "We worry that our local barns might not withstand a fierce blizzard. If there's a way to ensure a portion of grain is kept here, in better structures, we could retrieve it as needed during breaks in the weather." Tyrion exchanged a glance with Sansa. These were reasonable concerns, and they carried echoes of the North's age-old struggle to outlast winter. The old ways had taught them to store ample supplies, but the wars had depleted many storehouses. Tyrion nodded and spoke in a measured tone. "We anticipated heavier snows. The ravens from the citadel warned that the last summer was short and the winter may be correspondingly long. We've begun reinforcing some of Winterfell's granaries, making room for extra shipments. My suggestion is to use White Harbor as a port of entry for additional grain from the southern regions. While roads inland might be choked by snow, the ships can still bring goods if the White Knife remains passable. But we will need to coordinate carefully with House Manderley. Lord Lake rubbed his hands together and nodded, thoughtful. Yes, that would help. But shipping from the south will be costly, especially now that the crown demands its own tithes. We're not as wealthy as once we were. Can Winterfell negotiate better terms on our behalf? Sansa's voice was clear and soothing. We will. House Manderley is strongly allied with House Stark. We will put pressure on them to offer fair rates, not exploit the smaller houses for profit. Tyrion has been corresponding with the Manderleys. He can press them further. In exchange for your loyalty and contributions to the realm's defense, Winterfell will shoulder part of the cost to ensure no northern house starves. Lord Long exhaled in relief. That's all we could hope for, my lady. We thank you and Lord Tyrion as well. His voice stumbled a bit on Tyrion's title, but he forced it out. A year ago, he would not have done so. Tyrion acknowledged it with a courteous nod, noting the subtle shift in attitudes. The conversation continued in that vein for some time, detailing the logistics of storehouses, trade routes, and possible contingency plans if the storms proved truly disastrous. Tyrion took notes, referencing a ledger of projected yields from each region. Sansa listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her growing mastery of northern administration. They made a strong pair, she, the beloved Stark lady who commanded respect through heritage and empathy, he, the worldly mind who understood commerce, negotiation, and the power of forging alliances. When the meeting concluded, the lords departed in better spirits than they'd arrived, each carrying a parchment detailing the agreed-upon steps. They would linger in Winterfell for a couple of days to finalize small details, but the bulk of their mission was done. Sansa and Tyrion remained at the table, the warmth of the fire on their backs, sharing a moment of quiet amid the business of the day. Tyrion closed his ledger, fingers tapping the wooden cover. I've come to realize something about the North. It may be harsh, it may be perpetually suspicious, but once it accepts you, even grudgingly, it stands by you. These men seem genuine in their desire to work with us. Sansa's eyes flickered with an affectionate glow. They accept you because you've shown them respect, Tyrion. You haven't tried to force yourself on them. You haven't demanded they bend the knee or pay you fealty beyond what they already owe House Stark. And you've proven your worth by guiding us through these obstacles. He gave a self-deprecating shrug. I do what I can. At times, I wonder if they trust me only because they trust you so completely. Her hand drifted across the table to rest on his. It's both. We stand stronger together than apart. That's what they see. They shared a smile and unspoken acknowledgement of the bond between them before the duties of the day tugged them onward. Tyrion had letters to write to House Manderley, and Sansa needed to meet with the castle steward to discuss repairs on some of the outer gates. A fractious realm never rested. Later that afternoon, Tyrion found himself walking along Winterfell's battlements, the thick cloak around his shoulders pulled tight. The sky was leaden, the promise of fresh snow looming. From this vantage, he could see the sprawl of the courtyard, the smithy where men hammered away on new horseshoes, the training yard where recruits drilled with dull swords under the watchful eye of a stern master-at-arms. The clusters of outbuildings for storage and stables, the old towers that had been partially rebuilt since the wars. Even in winter's approach, the castle buzzed with life. He thought back to the first time he had visited Winterfell, so many years ago when King Robert had traveled north to recruit Ned Stark as his hand. Tyrion had been a curious onlooker then, an odd sight among men who spoke in broad northern accents. He had never imagined that one day he would stand on these walls as part of House Stark. It still seemed surreal. But the sight of the banners snapping in the breeze, one banner showing the dire wolf, another the conjoined sigil of the wolf and the lion, reminded him that improbable futures did indeed come to pass. He descended the steps and made his way to the godwood. The air felt colder there, the hush profound beneath the ancient weirwood branches. He found Sansa seated on a simple wooden bench near the heart tree, Joanna cradled in her arms. The child's cheeks were rosy from the cold, her eyes open in wonder at the swirling flakes that began to drift down. Sansa looked up as he approached, a gentle smile curving her lips. She was fussy indoors, so I thought the fresh air might help. It usually does. Tyrion chuckled softly, joining her on the bench. A northern babe through and through, I see. No wonder she quiets when she's out here in the snow. He stroked Joanna's hair, marveling at the gold-red hue that so neatly blended their heritages. She cooed, a sound that filled him with a tenderness he never expected to feel so deeply. Sansa's gaze flicked to the face carved into the heart tree's bark, and her voice turned pensive. I come here to clear my thoughts sometimes. The old gods saw so much suffering here. Our family lost nearly everything, yet we stand still. And now there's a new generation, a new chance for peace. She glanced at Tyrion, a question in her eyes. Do you think we can hold on to it? He considered his answer carefully, mindful of how many times he had seen peace slip through the realm's fingers like sand. We can't control everything, Sansa. Not the ambitions of distant lords, not the forces of nature, not the whims of fate. But we can remain vigilant, keep forging alliances, and do what's best for our people. We've built a strong foundation here, stronger than I ever believed possible. As long as we stay united, we have a chance. She nodded, brushing her fingers gently over Joanna's cheek. Sometimes, I dream of a future where our daughter grows up never knowing the terror of war. I know it's idealistic, but is it too foolish to hope? His throat tightened at the earnestness in her question. He placed his hand over hers. It's not foolish. It's what we should strive for. Even if the world is unpredictable, we can still believe in a kinder tomorrow. And if it never fully arrives, at least we'll have done our part. The soft hush of snowfall enveloped them for a while. Joanna drifted into a light doze, and Tyrion felt the small weight of her against his hand as he supported her back. Every so often, a crow cawed from a nearby branch, a jarring note in the tranquil scene. But that was the nature of the North. Serene beauty laced with the reminder that harsh reality was never far away. They returned to the warmth of the castle soon after, the winds picking up and the snow swirling into flurries. A caretaker took Joanna to be fed and to nap properly, leaving Tyrion and Sansa to resume their duties. Such was their life now. Stolen moments of quiet in the Godswood, balanced by hours of grueling governance. Yet neither complained. They had chosen this path, reclaimed it from a forced vow that once bound them in misery. That evening, they dined in the smaller family solar, joined by a few close advisors. The meal was modest: pottage of vegetables, roasted partridge, and warm bread with honey. Over supper, conversation flowed about the day's events, plans for fortifying roads, updates from the blacksmith about new arms shipments, and so forth. Sansa's steward briefed them on some minor repairs needed to the ramparts. Tyrion mentally tallied the costs, determined to see that corners were not cut. After the plates had been cleared, the advisors excused themselves. Tyrion lingered at the table, swirling a half cup of wine, lost in thought. Sansa came to stand behind him, resting her hands on his shoulders. "You're brooding," she observed softly. "What weighs on you?" He let out a small sigh. "Memories. In King's Landing, I was always trapped in intrigues, half-truths, and alliances that felt like quicksand. I don't want Winterfell to become the same. A web of conspiracies and whispered deals." Sansa leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to his temple. "You've done well so far. The North is more straightforward, if not always kinder. People speak their mind here for the most part. As long as you continue to meet them with honesty, we won't end up like the squabbling courts of the South." He reached up, covering her hand with his. "You're right. Still, I know from experience how easy it is for cracks to form. Envy or old grudges can blossom into threats. We should never grow complacent." She moved around to sit beside him, her skirt rustling softly. "No, we won't. But we have each other, and we have the loyalty of many northern houses that revere House Stark. Let that be our bulwark against the worst schemes." Her voice held a quiet, unwavering faith in him, in them. He felt a surge of gratitude for that faith. Once, no one had believed in Tyrion Lannister except perhaps his brother Jaime, and even that had been complicated. But Sansa, who had every reason to doubt him, had chosen to place her trust in him. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll go forward," he murmured. They passed the rest of the evening discussing small details about the next day's schedule, reading a few letters that arrived by Raven, one from Brienne of Tarth, who was traveling the Riverlands to restore order under the king's name, another from a merchant in Braavos seeking new trade opportunities. Eventually, they retired, finding Joanna asleep in her cradle, watched over by a kindly nurse. Sansa dismissed the nurse gently, then lifted the baby into her arms, gazing at her with a mother's wonder. Tyrion felt a familiar warmth bloom in his chest, the same warmth that reminded him how improbable this had once seemed, and how precious it was now. As winter deepened, the world outside the walls turned harsh. Blizzards swept the north, burying roads and fields under thick layers of snow. The nights lengthened, the cold intensifying, yet within Winterfell the fires burned bright. Tyrion oversaw the distribution of grain to nearby villages, ensuring that no families starved despite the frigid conditions. Sansa spent time hearing petitions from common folk, many of whom braved the weather to come before her and ask for relief or justice. Together, they navigated the intricacies of rationing, gleaning, and carefully maintaining morale. In those cold months, a new threat emerged, one that did not come from the wild reaches beyond the wall or from a foreign invasion, but rather from within. A small group of disgruntled minor lords, some with distant Bolton connections, began grumbling that a Lannister had no place ruling in the north. They spoke of the purity of northern blood, and quietly stirred up talk that Sansa's child was half a southern lion. Though these voices were few, they carried echoes of old resentments. The rumors reached Tyrion and Sansa in the form of hushed reports from loyal bannermen. Some men were meeting in secret, encouraging each other to resist Winterfell's call for taxes or to remember the old ways, implying that leadership should remain untainted by southern ties. Sansa refused to let these whispers fester unnoticed. She dispatched trusted envoys to speak directly to these minor lords to gauge their true intentions. One evening, Sansa and Tyrion discussed the matter in private. The baby was asleep, so they had retreated to their bedchamber, warmed by a brazier. Shadows flickered across the walls as Tyrion paced. "We knew some would never accept me," he said, voice low. "But if they openly incite rebellion..." Sansa's face was set, determined. "Then we must address it swiftly. The North suffered under the Boltons. We will not allow any resurgence of such cruelty or division. But I will not be tyrannical either. We'll offer them a chance to make amends. I remember how my father dealt with conflicts firmly but with fairness." Tyrion stood still, considering. "Yes, your father was known for justice. We could summon these lords, speak plainly with them. Let them air their grievances under our roof. If they see reason, let them remain in our good graces, so long as they do not endanger the realm." He paused, exhaling. "If they refuse, we can't allow them to destabilize the North. We might have to levy fines or, in the worst case, strip them of some privileges." Sansa nodded. "Let's do that. Show them we don't fear them, but we'll hear them out." She crossed to Tyrion and rested a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not naive. I know there's always a risk of traitors. But I'd prefer to avoid bloodshed if we can." He covered her hand with his. "Agreed. Bloodshed here would remind everyone too much of what Ramsay Bolton did or what happened under the Lannisters' tyranny in King's Landing. Peace is fragile. Let's keep to reason, if possible." They set the plan in motion. Ravens were sent to these lords, mainly men of modest holdings, not nearly as influential as the Karstarks or Manderleys, but enough to cause trouble if unify. Addition, they were invited to Winterfell to voice their concerns directly. Over the course of several weeks, the lords arrived in ones or twos, and Sansa and Tyrion received them in a smaller, formal audience chamber, flanked by loyal guards. Most expressed their frustrations guardedly. They claimed they worried about southern infiltration or lack of respect for northern tradition. Tyrion listened carefully, never letting sarcasm slip out, though it tempted him. Sansa answered with measured calm, pointing out the ways in which Winterfell had actually preserved northern customs, from caring for the small folk to venerating the godswood. She reminded them that the Boltons had brought untold horror, and that House Stark would not allow a return to darkness, nor would they cast aside an ally who had proven his loyalty. Some lords hung their heads, grumbling apologies, not wanting open confrontation. They recognized the stronger alliances around them. Others tried to push further. One in particular, a Lord Glover by marriage named Heward Rowan, dared to imply that a bastard of pure northern stock would be preferable to a half-lion whelp. Tyrion's jaw clenched in silent rage at the insult to Joanna. But Sansa fixed Lord Rowan with an icy stare reminiscent of her mother, Catelyn Stark, and said only, "Insult my daughter again, and you will find your holdings forfeit. My patience with those who disrespect my family is short." Her tone cut like the winter wind. Lord Rowan blanched, stammering, and retreated from the castle soon after. The weeks of talks ended with a tenuous truce. The disgruntled lords found themselves isolated, lacking broad support. Tyrion had quietly reached out to allied houses who reaffirmed loyalty to House Stark and refused to be drawn into petty attempts at stirring division. In exchange for the promise of more direct involvement in local governance, Sansa was willing to let them feel heard. Most fell silent. The threat receded, at least for now. As the winter moon waxed and waned, the snows began to lessen. Drifts in the courtyard melted into muddy puddles. Runners from the distant outposts reported that roads were clearing, and the earliest travelers from the south brought news of happenings in King's Landing. The new king, advised by a small council of lords loyal to the Targaryen lineage, was focusing on rebuilding. Taxes were heavy, but the realm seemed to be in the midst of a cautious reconstruction. Tyrion felt only mild relief that the capital was not in flames again. He had no real desire to return, content to let King's Landing stay a distant memory. One day, while Tyrion walked through the courtyard, watching recruits train under the crisp spring sky, he spotted Brienne of Tarth emerging from the stables, her cloak dusted with the residue of a long journey. She had a small retinue of loyal warriors. Tyrion's face lit up with surprise and genuine pleasure. Brienne had always been a figure of fierce honor, sworn to protect Sansa and her siblings in ways that went beyond the typical sense of duty. He hurried across the courtyard. "Sir Brienne," he called, raising a hand. She turned at the sound of his voice. Even after the wars and her endless travels, she looked as stalwart as ever, her short hair brushed back, her gaze direct. "Lord Tyrion," she greeted, her voice calm but not unkind. "I trust Winterfell stands strong." "Stronger than we dared hope," he replied. "Sansa will be thrilled to see you. You've arrived at an opportune time, just as winter recedes." He studied her face, noting a certain weariness around her eyes. "Come, let's get you settled. You must be half frozen." She nodded, adjusting the grip on her saddlebag. "We have much to discuss. I bring letters from King's Landing, from the Riverlands, and beyond. I also have news of potential threats along the King's Road. Bandits, possibly remnants of old Sellsword companies." Tyrion's mouth quirked in a grimace. "There's always another threat. Come, I'll lead you to the Solar. Sansa will want to greet you immediately." Brienne and her companions followed Tyrion into the keep, where he beckoned a steward to guide them to accommodations. Meanwhile, he himself led Brienne to the Solar. Sansa was inside, standing by the window, a letter in her hand. She turned at their entrance, and a brilliant smile overtook her face at the sight of her longtime protector. Without hesitation, she crossed the room and embraced Brienne warmly. "Sir Brienne," she said, voice full of affection. "You've been gone too long. I'm glad to see you safe." Brienne, for her part, looked momentarily bashful. She returned the embrace with a careful pat, mindful of her armored gauntlets. "My lady, I've missed your company as well. I've been traveling the Riverlands, ensuring no brigands remain to harass your family's seat." She paused, then added, "I heard of your official union with Lord Tyrion and the birth of your daughter. Let me offer my congratulations." Sansa looked to Tyrion with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Sir Brienne. Joanna has brought much joy to Winterfell. I hope you'll meet her soon." They settled around a table. Tyrion poured them each a cup of watered wine, then waited as Brienne produced several scrolls from her pack. "These contain updates from the south," she explained. "The king's advisors are trying to restore trade routes, but they're struggling with pockets of lawlessness left by the war. I also have a missive from what remains of House Tully. Edmure Tully is re-establishing his presence in Riverrun, but tensions with certain local lords continue." Sansa's brow furrowed. "My uncle Edmure was always well-meaning, but not the strongest in diplomacy. Still, I'm glad Riverrun is once again under Tully hands." Brienne nodded. "He sends his respects to you, Lady Stark, and to the memory of your mother and father. He hopes to strengthen alliances with the North, possibly through trade or mutual defense pacts." Tyrion steepled his fingers, intrigued. "That could be beneficial. Riverrun sits on key waterways. If we can coordinate shipping through the Trident, we might expand our trade beyond White Harbor." Brienne offered a small, satisfied nod. "Exactly. Lord Edmure is hoping for stability just as much as anyone else. The war left the Riverlands devastated. They need allies." Sansa reached for one of the scrolls. She unrolled it, skimming the contents, her expression shifting between thoughtfulness and cautious optimism. "We'll consider how best to formalize an agreement. The North can provide resources like the iron from our mines or furs, and the Riverlands can provide grain once their fields are fully restored. It might also help quell lingering hostility if people see the Riverlands and the North united. She set the scroll aside. Brienne, how long can you stay? The tall knight met her gaze. As long as you need me, my lady. I've sworn to protect you. I've fulfilled various tasks for the crown, but now that King's Landing is somewhat stable, I'd rather see you and your family safe. Sansa smiled gently, gratitude shining in her eyes. Then I'll gladly have you remain. Your presence is always reassuring. The conversation turned to practicalities, routes of travel, which lords in the Riverlands might prove troublesome, how best to secure the roads for merchants. Tyrion found himself once again grateful for Brienne's forthrightness. She was a warrior who despised deceit, yet she had learned how to navigate politics in her own direct manner, never losing her moral compass. If more people in Westeros could be like her, Tyrion mused, the realm would be in far less peril. In the weeks that followed, Brienne's presence became a familiar sight around Winterfell. She often sparred with the guards in the courtyard, demonstrating her impressive skill. Sansa introduced her to Joanna, and Brienne held the baby with surprising tenderness, a small smile tugging at her usually stoic features. Joanna gurgled and reached for the shining armor, fascinated by the reflection of torchlight on metal. Tyrion continued to handle the administrative side of forging an alliance with Riverrun. Letters flew back and forth by Raven, negotiating terms of trade, mutual defense, and the possibility of exchanging wards between the families to foster goodwill. Sansa agreed in principle, though she insisted on ensuring any northern children sent south would be well cared for. She refused to repeat the mistakes that had once befallen her own siblings in the south. As spring advanced, the snows fully melted, turning the roads into muddy swaths but allowing for more traffic. Merchants began arriving at Winterfell with wagons of goods, spices from across the narrow sea, bolts of cloth from the Westerlands, and olive oil from the Arbor. The courtyard came alive with color and clamor. Tyrion used this opportunity to expand trade networks, always mindful of ensuring the North's resilience in the face of future winters. In the midst of this renewal, word arrived from beyond the wall. Tormund Giantsbane and several free-folk communities were encountering difficulties. Apparently, a rogue group of outlaws, possibly deserters from the Night's Watch or leftover mercenaries, had been harassing them, burning small encampments and looting. The free folk now considered themselves under the protection of the North, thanks to Jon Snow's old accords. Tormund's Raven asked for help. Sansa read the message aloud to Tyrion one evening in the Solar. Her expression grew grim. Jon once promised we'd respect the free folk's right to live beyond the wall without persecution. If they're under attack, we have a duty to intervene. Tyrion rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's not a trivial journey. The lands beyond the wall are still harsh, and many in the North remain suspicious of the free folk. But these outlaws pose a threat not just to them, but potentially to our own frontiers if they decide to raid south. Sansa set the parchment aside, determination lighting her eyes. We'll send a detachment led by someone we trust. I'd go myself if not for Joanna. Tyrion exhaled, a pang of worry. We need a capable commander who can navigate those frozen wastes. Someone who has experience dealing with wildling culture, free folk culture, he corrected himself gently. We can't afford miscommunication or unnecessary bloodshed. That was when Brienne stepped forward. She had been standing by the hearth reading a different letter. I volunteer, she said simply, her voice carrying quiet certainty. I know how to handle negotiations. I've traveled difficult roads before. The free folk respect strength and honesty, which I can provide. Let me go with a small force to quell these outlaws. Sansa's mouth opened to object, then closed. She nodded slowly. You're likely the best choice, she admitted. I trust no one else more to carry out a mission of both defense and diplomacy. Tyrion concurred, though he worried for Brienne's safety. It won't be easy, he said. The terrain alone is treacherous, and we've had only scattered reports of these outlaws. We don't even know how large their numbers might be. Brienne's expression remained resolute. I've faced worse. I'll choose 20 good men well-versed in winter travel. We'll proceed carefully, contact Tormund, and coordinate a strategy. The priority is to protect those settlements and ensure the outlaws can't raid further. Sansa drew a breath, looking from Tyrion to Brienne. Very well. I'll have the stewards ready supplies for your expedition. Take enough provisions for a lengthy mission. If you need reinforcements, send word immediately. And keep an eye out for any sign of Jon Snow if he still wanders beyond the wall. It's unlikely, but one never knows. A flicker of nostalgia passed over her face at the mention of Jon. No one had heard from him in many moons. Rumors sometimes said he roamed far to the north with Ghost at his side, living among the free folk, escaping the burdens of kingship and family. Tyrion often thought about him, wondering what personal journey he had undertaken in those icy wastes. But that was Jon's path, not theirs. So Brienne prepared. Within a few days, she and her chosen troop departed Winterfell, heading toward Castle Black and the gates that led beyond the wall. Sansa stood at the courtyard gates to see them off, worry etched in her posture despite her calm expression. Tyrion noted the exchange of respect between Brienne and Sansa, a silent vow that they would do their duty, no matter the cost. In Brienne's absence, life at Winterfell continued. The improvements to trade advanced, and Sansa hosted a delegation from Riverrun, which included the newly appointed Master-at-Arms there, a grizzled soldier who'd once fought beside the Blackfish. Tyrion found the negotiations refreshingly direct, and the result was a formal agreement to facilitate trade between the North and the Riverlands. Grain for iron, mutual defense in case of external threats. The visitors left satisfied, promising to return with the official seal of Edmure Tully in the weeks to come. Joanna, meanwhile, grew in leaps and bounds. She was soon crawling across the rugs in Sansa's solar, babbling in half-formed words that only her parents could interpret. Whenever Sansa or Tyrion came near, she looked up with shining eyes and a toothless grin. Tyrion felt his heart swell each time he heard her attempt to speak, every squeal of delight a testament to the life he had never dreamed he'd be blessed with. Sansa would laugh as Joanna attempted to pull herself upright using the edges of chairs, determinately balancing on chubby legs. Their child had become a beloved figure among the staff and guards, part curiosity, part symbol of renewal. Some older men-at-arms who had served the Starks for decades said the baby reminded them of Ned Stark's children long ago. Others teased that she had Tyrion's sharp eyes and Sansa's regal bearing, which made Tyrion chuckle, since she could barely stand, let alone bear herself regally. But no matter how she was viewed, Joanna brought warmth to Winterfell's halls. The anxieties of the realm never vanished, of course. The next crisis manifested in a surprising quarter, White Harbor. Reports came in of pirate raids along the coast, targeting fishing villages under House Manderly's protection. The Manderlys requested urgent assistance, warships, men, anything to repel the sudden threat. Tyrion knew that the Northern Fleet was small and not particularly adept at maritime battles, but ignoring the raids would lead to further destabilization. Late one night, Sansa and Tyrion gathered in her study with the senior advisors. By candlelight, they pored over maps of the coastline. Lord Manderly himself had sent a missive, thick with anxiety, detailing how the pirates struck swiftly then vanished into the open sea. The Wolf's Den, White Harbor's old fortress, was no longer fully equipped to repel seaborne invasions. House Manderly's small fleet struggled to keep pace. Sansa tapped her finger on the map. If these raids continue, White Harbor could be crippled. That city is our major trade port. It's vital for the North's economy, especially for bringing in supplies. We can't let that happen. Tyrion studied the lines of the coastline, recalling the few references he'd read about northern sea currents. Pirates are opportunistic. They sense that the realm is still rebuilding. The royal fleet might be too busy securing the southern coasts to bother with White Harbor. We'll need a direct approach. One of the advisors, a lanky northern knight named Ser Hallier, spoke up. My lady, we could dispatch some of our troops by land, but they won't be able to chase pirates at sea. Perhaps we might hire sails or mercenary ships to bolster White Harbor's defenses. Tyrion's mind churned. Hiring mercenaries was always risky. They could be bought by another bidder. Alternatively, we could appeal to the Vale, he said. The Vale has ships and they owe some loyalty to the North. Sansa's mother was a Tully, but the connection to the Vale was through your aunt, Lady Lisa Arryn, was it not? If the Vale's new leadership is open to forging a maritime alliance, they might lend a fleet. Sansa frowned slightly. The Vale has been largely insular since the war. Lord Royce is rumored to hold sway, but getting them to act might require more than a polite request. Still, it's worth a try. Let's send an envoy to the Vale, see what terms they demand for maritime cooperation. They agreed on a plan. House Stark would approach the Vale while simultaneously dispatching a contingent of archers and spearmen to White Harbor to strengthen its land defenses. If the Vale refused or stalled, they'd consider alternative methods, including purchasing or building new ships, though that would be a long-term project. A fresh flurry of letters went out. Sansa selected a loyal retainer to travel to the Vale and present the case, bearing a letter sealed with the Stark sigil. Lord Manderley was informed of the plan with assurances that help was coming. In the meantime, White Harbor had to hold out as best as it could. Tyrion wished, not for the first time, that Westeros possessed an easier system of unity, something beyond these fractious alliances. But each region guarded its resources and secrets. The scars from the war were still raw, and no one wanted to overextend for fear of leaving themselves vulnerable. So each negotiation felt like walking a tightrope. Days turned to weeks. Small updates arrived from White Harbor. Another raid had been thwarted, but 2 fishing hamlets were razed. Tensions ran high in the Great Hall of Winterfell, especially when local merchants began complaining that their goods couldn't reach market for fear of pirate attacks on coastal roads. Tyrion spent hours in conversation with House Manderley's envoys, trying to craft short-term solutions. Meanwhile, they awaited word from the Vale. Around this time, another raven arrived from Brienne. She was still beyond the wall, but the message was succinct. Outlaws more numerous than expected. Tormund's people scattered. Need reinforcements. Will hold out as long as possible. Sansa read the note aloud, her voice trembling slightly. She needs our help. Tyrion's heart sank. He had hoped Brienne's small company would suffice, but apparently the problem went deeper. The outlaws might have formed a large band, intent on exploiting the uncharted north. The question was how many men to send, and who would lead them without leaving Winterfell dangerously underdefended, especially with potential unrest still smoldering from certain lords. They convened another council. Ser Hallier, who had proven capable and loyal, stepped up. Let me lead a second group of riders north. I can coordinate with Brienne and Tormund. Perhaps I can bring enough of a force to crush these outlaws, or at least drive them away. Sansa looked to Tyrion. We can't ignore Brienne's call, but we also can't leave White Harbor's problem unaddressed. We must split our resources wisely. Tyrion nodded, rubbing his temples. Yes, let's do it this way. Ser Hallier will take a portion of the garrison north. We'll keep enough men here to send to White Harbor. That means we have to rely more on local militias in case of any trouble around Winterfell itself. I'll accelerate the negotiations with the Vale. We need some good news on that front, or White Harbor may suffer more raids. It was a delicate balancing act, defending the northmost reaches and the coastline, all while maintaining a semblance of order at Winterfell. But they had no choice. Orders went out. Ser Hallier departed a week later, with 50 mounted men along with supply wagons laden with extra provisions for Brienne's contingent. The rest of Winterfell ready for any ripple effects these events might bring. Days blurred as the North's challenges mounted. Yet through it all, Sansa and Tyrion drew strength from each other and from Joanna, whose bright-eyed wonder at the simplest of things reminded them both why they strove so hard for stability. When the nights were at their longest, they'd settle by the hearth, Sansa often with Joanna in her arms, Tyrion reading some treatise on northern law or finalizing correspondences. They found pockets of peace in the hush of a shared room, the child's sleepy murmurs a lullaby to calm the day's anxieties. At long last, word arrived from the Vale. The courier returned bearing a message with the errand seal. Sansa broke it open, scanning the contents while Tyrion watched her expression. Slowly, her brow relaxed. They're willing to help, she announced, relief in her voice. Apparently, Lord Royce sees the pirate threat as a chance to expand the Vale's influence in northern waters. In exchange, they want certain trade guarantees, iron or shipments, and a lowered tariff on goods passing the Bloody Gate. Tyrion allowed himself a small, triumphant grin. That's workable. We have enough iron from the mines near the Drevfort region, and lowering tariffs is a small price for a stable coast. So the Vale's fleet will sail north? Sansa nodded, passing him the scroll. Yes. They'll dispatch a fleet of 5 war galleys and several smaller ships to White Harbor within a fortnight. That should tip the balance against any pirates. Then House Manderley can mount an offensive to clear the waters. The Vale only asks for a formal treaty ensuring mutual aid. Tyrion's grin widened as he scanned the details. This is excellent news. I'll draft the necessary agreements. If we can hold off the pirates until the Vale arrives, White Harbor might be saved. He looked to Sansa, excitement coloring his voice. We just need to coordinate with Manderley. Perhaps we can even set a trap, lure the pirates in when the Vale fleet is near. We'll rid the northern seas of this menace for good. Sansa's eyes shone with renewed hope. Then we'll do it. I'll send another raven to Lord Manderley tonight, alerting him to the Vale's impending arrival. We can't leave anything to chance. This might be our best opportunity to stabilize the entire eastern coast. They wasted no time. Over the next few days, Tyrion strategized with the Manderley envoys, finalizing the plan. The Manderley fleet would feign weakness, luring the pirates to strike again, not realizing the Vale ships were just out of sight. Then, when the pirates engaged, the combined forces would close in from two sides, trapping them against the harbor. Of course, it hinged on precise timing, the weather, and the pirates' willingness to take the bait. But it was their most promising option. Meanwhile, no updates had come from Ser Hallier or Brienne beyond the wall, and a quiet worry gnawed at Tyrion. He tried to push it aside, focusing on the tasks at hand. If the North was to remain strong, all fronts had to be managed. Still, as days turned to weeks, he would wake in the early hours wondering if Brienne and the free folk were holding on, if the outlaws had grown bolder, if a second raven calling for even more help might arrive. One afternoon, while Sansa was out inspecting the southwestern perimeter walls, a project she had championed, Tyrion found himself alone in the library with Joanna. The child was not quite walking yet, but she insisted on pulling herself up on every bookshelf, tottering on unsteady feet. The library was drafty, but Tyrion had ordered extra braziers, determined to spend some time here to catch up on reading. He couldn't resist letting Joanna explore under his watchful eye, even though he knew Sansa would fret about the chill. As Tyrion thumbed through an old volume on Northern Maritime history, hoping for some insight that might help the White Harbor situation, Joanna made a small squeak of protest. He turned to see her trying to reach for a lower shelf, on which thick tomes were piled, just out of her grasp. A wave of paternal warmth surged through him. He set the book aside, crouched next to her, and gently lifted the volume she wanted. It was a large, old leather-bound tome of Northern legends and songs. Of course, she just wanted to pat the cover, not read the contents. But her determined spirit made him smile. "Impatient, aren't you?" he teased softly. "I know the feeling. We both want answers that sometimes remain out of reach." He let her run her tiny hands over the ancient leather. She babbled in her incomprehensible baby language, as if complaining it wouldn't open itself. In that moment, the door to the library swung open, revealing Sansa. She paused, taking in the sight of Tyrion kneeling beside Joanna, both of them engrossed in an old book. A gentle laugh escaped her. "Are you training her to be your co-counsel already, Tyrion?" He glanced up with a mock-solemn expression. "It's never too early for the pursuit of knowledge. Besides, she seemed quite insistent on forging her own path here." Sansa's gaze softened, and she crossed the room, kneeling on the other side of Joanna. "You're going to be a clever girl, aren't you?" she cooed, smoothing the child's hair. Joanna let out another squeal, perhaps in approval. They remained like that for a time, an unspoken harmony linking them. It was these small moments that gave them the strength to face the storms of ruling the North. Sansa shifted her weight, resting a hand on Tyrion's shoulder. "The southwestern walls are almost done," she told him. "We've reinforced them against future sieges. I know we pray there won't be another war, but if there is, I want Winterfell to be ready." Tyrion nodded, recalling the many times Winterfell had been taken or threatened during the wars. "Prudent. We'd be fools to assume peace lasts forever." A steward arrived just then, announcing the presence of a messenger from White Harbor. Sansa sighed, standing and handing Joanna to Tyrion. "Duty calls again." She leaned in to press a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I'll meet this messenger in the Solar. Join me when you can." Tyrion, holding Joanna securely, rose to his feet. He took a moment to return the library books to their places, then followed at a slower pace, not wanting to jostle the child. In the corridor, servants hustled about, carrying linens or trays of food. The castle had never been busier, a sign of how alive Winterfell was after so much time in turmoil. Tyrion's mind drifted to how different this place had been under the Boltons, how silent and haunted. Now it thrived, the air filled with conversation and daily bustle. He arrived at the Solar, where Sansa stood with a hooded man in travel-stained clothes. The man was finishing a statement. "The Vale fleet is scheduled to arrive within the next 4 days, my lady. Lord Manderley is prepared to feign retreat once they're sighted." Sansa nodded, acknowledging Tyrion as he entered. She gestured for the man to repeat the final details. Tyrion listened closely, heart quickening. The moment of truth was near. If the Vale fleet arrived in time and the pirates took the bait, White Harbor might be saved. "We have to make sure the pirates suspect nothing," Tyrion said. "Have Lord Manderley keep the majority of his ships in the harbor, appear vulnerable. When they spot the pirates on the horizon, they must fall back slightly, as though ceding the field, drawing the raiders in." The messenger nodded. "Yes, my lord, that is the plan. The Vale ships will come from the east, hidden by the morning mists, hopefully. They'll trap the pirates against the harbor's shoals." Sansa's expression was resolute. "Convey to Lord Manderley that we stand ready to send further reinforcements if needed. But the main battle will be at sea. May the Seven, and the old gods, be with them." The messenger bowed. "I'll depart at once." Then his gaze flicked to the baby in Tyrion's arms, and he offered a small, respectful bow. "My lady, my lord, the realm appreciates all you do." With that, he turned and exited. Tyrion let out a slow breath. "It's out of our hands now." Sansa came forward and gently coaxed Joanna from his arms. "Let's pray the next word we hear is good news," she said softly. "We've had enough tragedy for one lifetime." They did not have to wait long. Within a week, a fleet of battered but triumphant Vale ships sailed into White Harbor. The pirates had indeed fallen for Manderley's ruse and were caught in a pincer. Trapped and overwhelmed, the raiders faced fierce combat. Though some pirates escaped, the majority were either captured or slain. White Harbor's immediate threat was ended, and the Vale's intervention sealed a new bond between the North and the Eyrie. The cost in lives, while not light, was far less than it might have been had the pirates continued ravaging the coast unchecked. A raven arrived bearing the news, which Sansa read aloud in the great hall as northern lords, knights, and common folk crowded in. A cheer went up when she finished, echoes ringing off the stone walls. People cheered House Manderley, the Vale, and the steadfast leadership of Winterfell. Tyrion stood beside Sansa on the dais, heart pounding with relief and pride. For once, the realm's fractious nature had worked in their favor. 2 regions had come together to stamp out a threat. That night, the castle celebrated. Ale flowed, songs were sung around the hearth. Even though the threat beyond the wall remained unresolved, they seized this moment of victory. Sansa allowed a modest feast in the great hall, roast duck, spiced turnips, honey cakes, and invited representatives from the Vale ships who had come up to Winterfell for negotiations. The atmosphere was jubilant, the gloom of winter replaced by the warm glow of hope. Tyrion watched from the high table as Sansa circulated among the guests, gracious in her thanks. She wore a gown of deep blue tonight, her hair in a simple braid down her back. At one point, she turned and caught his eye. His heart stirred at the way her lips curved into a small, private smile, the kind meant only for him. He rose from his seat, weaving through the crowd. When he reached her side, she took his arm, leaning in to speak quietly over the noise. "We did it," she murmured. "Or rather, we laid the groundwork for others to do it. White Harbor is safe again." He covered her hand with his. "You guided them, my lady, and you gave them reason to trust one another. Don't undervalue that." They stood there a moment, listening to the rowdy laughter of sailors from the Vale who recounted the sea battle with grand embellishments. Tyrion found a goblet of wine pressed into his hand by a passing servant, and he took a measured sip. Sansa's presence at his side was a comforting anchor in the swirl of celebration. "I hope we can say the same for Brienne soon," she said softly, worry returning to her voice. He nodded, wishing he had answers. "So do I. No word yet, but perhaps no news is good news. The ravens can be slow from that far north. Let's believe she is making progress." She swallowed, forcing a small smile. "Yes, we'll believe that." Then she lifted her chin, adopting a more public face as a group of northern knights approached, offering toasts to her health. Tyrion observed how skillfully she managed them, how graciously she accepted their praise without arrogance, how she redirected attention to the men who had fought. She was every inch the Lady of Winterfell, and he stood at her side, an equal partner in the realm's eyes. The next day was quieter, but an air of optimism lingered around the castle. Tyrion spent the morning ensuring that fresh supplies would be sent to White Harbor as a gesture of good faith. He also drafted the final form of the treaty with the Vale, giving them the promised trade concessions. Sansa signed it with a flourish, stamping it with the Stark seal. It felt like a tangible step forward, a sign that the North was not as alone or isolated as some believed. Time marched on. The roads dried further, and green shoots began to peek through the thawing soil. Joanna continued to grow as children do, each day discovering new wonders. She tottered along the corridors now, squealing when she managed 3 or 4 steps before plopping down in exasperation. Sansa and Tyrion beamed at every milestone, sharing proud glances that said more than words could. One crisp morning, a raven finally arrived from beyond the wall. This time, the note was penned in Brienne's own firm hand. She reported that Ser Halia and the reinforcements had arrived safely, uniting with Tormund and the scattered free folk. A series of skirmishes had pushed the outlaws northward away from the settlements. Many of the criminals had been killed and the rest fled deeper into the wilds, though a few had been taken captive. Brienne hinted at the possibility that Jon Snow might have clashed with some of these same outlaws, though she had not seen him in person. She believed the threat was nearly neutralized and the free folk could begin rebuilding their communities. Sansa read the letter to Tyrion, relief flooding her features. She pressed a hand to her chest. She did it. They did it. The free folk are safe again. Tyrion exhaled a tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. And Brienne remains unscathed, it seems? Sansa smiled. She doesn't mention any serious wounds. She says she'll return as soon as the last pockets of resistance are cleared. I'm so grateful, Tyrion. She's done so much for us. He took the letter from her, scanning it again. A line caught his eye. The free folk speak of your child with a strange sort of reverence, Brienne had written. They find the idea of a Stark and a Lannister forging a new beginning oddly admirable. Tyrion smirked wryly at that. Even the free folk recognized the significance of their union. Perhaps the entire realm did in time. In the weeks that followed, Brienne led her small contingent south again. She and Tormund parted ways near the wall, with Tormund returning to guard his people's territory. Soon after, Brienne rode into Winterfell's courtyard with the remaining knights. Cheers greeted her arrival, word spreading quickly of their success. Tyrion and Sansa descended the steps to meet her. Sansa embraced Brienne openly, ignoring the mud and dust on her cloak. Joanna toddled forward, clinging to Sansa's skirts, staring wide-eyed at the imposing knight. Brienne knelt, removing one gauntlet to smile gently at Joanna. She extended her hand, and Joanna, with a curious tilt of her head, patted it. Brienne's eyes flickered with an affection she rarely showed. You've grown, she said softly. Last time I saw you, you were just an infant in your mother's arms. Tyrion touched Brienne's shoulder. Welcome home, Ser Brienne. You've done us proud. She rose, bowing her head respectfully. It's good to be back. The outlaws won't trouble the free folk again anytime soon. The few survivors scattered in fear. Tormund sends his thanks, my lady. And he mentioned glimpses of Jon Snow in the far north. He believes Jon might be living in solitude, though he wouldn't say more. Sansa's lips parted in a silent exhale, a swirl of longing and acceptance crossing her face. I'm glad to know he's well enough to roam. Perhaps one day he'll come south again, but if not, at least he lives free as he always wanted. She gently guided Joanna to her side, lifting her into her arms as the child reached for her mother. Come inside. Eat, rest. We'll hear all your stories in due time. With that, Brienne and the returning knights were ushered into the hall, where they were welcomed as heroes. Tyrion's relief mingled with pride in how the North and the free folk had cooperated. No longer were they enemies. If anything, the war had taught them that unity was far more valuable than suspicion. In the following months, more changes swept the land. The roads between Winterfell and White Harbor became bustling trade arteries. Riverrun and the Vale both strengthened ties with the North. Sansa even sent courteous letters to King's Landing, maintaining a nominal relationship with the crown. She made it clear the North wished no conflict, but also had no desire to be subservient. The crown, overstretched and eager to avoid further rebellions, accepted the status quo. Tyrion took note that, for once, peace seemed to have some staying power, at least for the time being. All the while, the child Joanna thrived. By her second name day, she was darting around the courtyard with surprising agility, chasing after a wooden direwolf toy that one of the guards had carved for her. She was fearless, reaching out to pat the real wolves in the kennels under supervision, of course. Her wide eyes gleamed whenever she saw a new curiosity, and she babbled incessantly with a vocabulary that mixed real words with nonsense. Sansa would patiently correct her, or sometimes just laugh, letting the child delight in her own discoveries. Tyrion found the role of father both exhilarating and terrifying. He He worried about failing her, about the day she might realize the world saw him as a dwarf and question what that meant for her. But he also reveled in every moment she clutched his hand, every time she called him Papa in that bright, earnest voice. He would spin her in circles, carefully watching her laugh as the courtyard blurred around her. Every day he felt more certain that he had found a purpose in protecting what he once thought he could never have. By the time Joanna was 3, Sansa began teaching her the rudiments of courtesy, how to greet guests, how to say thank you, how to show kindness to those around her. Tyrion taught her numbers and basic letters, scribbling them on scrap parchment. She was sharp, picking things up quickly, though with the impatience of a small child who preferred playing in the snow to sitting still. Sometimes Tyrion would catch the old castellan peeking around a corner, smiling fondly at this new generation. Beyond the personal joys, Tyrion and Sansa continued to govern the north with steady hands. They rebuilt trust among the smaller lords, distributed resources fairly, and embraced alliances that brought the region greater prosperity than it had known in decades. The name Lannister no longer provoked quite the same hostility it once had. People now linked it to Tyrion's wise governance and fatherly devotion rather than Tywin's ruthlessness or Cersei's cruelty. The name Stark, of course, retained its storied reverence. Together, they formed a new symbol that, however improbably, resonated throughout Westeros, the wolf and the lion standing side by side in peace. They were not naive. Sansa still received the occasional raven hinting at tensions elsewhere. The Iron Islands toyed with rebellion once more, clashing with the Crown's attempts to rein them in. The Reach had its own internal power struggles, with minor lords jockeying for influence after the Tyrells' downfall. King's Landing was never short on intrigue. But these troubles did not spill northward in any immediate way. Tyrion occasionally sent scouts or envoys to keep tabs, but otherwise Winterfell lived free from southern entanglements. At times, Tyrion wondered about Jaime, his older brother, who had vanished after the war's end. Rumors placed Jaime wandering through distant lands, trying to atone for old sins. Tyrion felt a wistful ache for him, but accepted that if Jaime wanted to stay away, that was his choice. The realm was littered with people seeking redemption or hiding from their pasts. Tyrion himself had found redemption not by running, but by building something better in the north. He could only hope Jaime might find his own path in time. Meanwhile, Sansa's relationship with Arya remained complicated. Arya was rumored to travel frequently, sometimes returning to Winterfell for short visits. She never stayed long, unwilling to be tied down. But each time she did, Tyrion observed a deep affection between the sisters, tempered by their vastly different lives. Arya would ruffle Joanna's hair, call her little cub, and vanish again. She spoke to Tyrion politely enough, but there was a guarded distance, as though she saw in him not only the kindly Lord of Winterfell but also the echoes of the old Lannister name. He respected that distance. In time, perhaps they would forge a closer bond, but he never forced it. The years slipped by in a rhythm of governance and family. A second child joined their family, a boy named Eddard Tywin, Ned for short, honoring both of their fathers in a delicate balance that took some courage on Sansa's part. Ned was a quieter baby than Joanna had been, more prone to gazing solemnly at the world. But Tyrion loved him fiercely, just as he did Joanna. Sansa beamed at the new life in her arms, her maternal warmth complemented by an unshakable resolve to protect her children from the horrors she once knew. In the Great Hall, new banners were woven and hung, celebrating the union of Stark and Lannister with an artful blend of heraldry. Visitors from far-flung corners of Westeros arrived, some out of curiosity, some out of genuine admiration for the peace that Winterfell had built. Tyrion continued to oversee the realm's finances, ensuring the roads were maintained and the harvests were stored. Sansa served as the face of Winterfell, beloved by her people, wise and poised in her judgments. Occasional crises arose, a bad crop here, a band of thieves there, a dispute with a neighboring lord. But none reached the scale of the old wars. The strong alliances they had nurtured stood as bulwarks against chaos. They had learned the value of forging ties rather than tearing them down. Every so often, Tyrion would slip away to the Godwood, alone or with Sansa. The heart tree bore silent witness to the passing seasons. Its carved face, eyes stained red by sap, seemed to observe them with ancient wisdom. Tyrion would reflect on the journey that had brought him here, a dwarf once scorned in the south, now a lord in the north. He no longer felt like an outcast. He belonged. And that sense of belonging was worth more than all the gold Casterly Rock had ever boasted. Sometimes he and Sansa spoke of the future, which child might inherit Winterfell, how to raise them to respect both Stark traditions and the more pragmatic lessons Tyrion had learned at King's Landing. They spoke of forging alliances with other regions to ensure that the North would never again be caught unprepared. They even spoke of the day when they might pass on their duties, perhaps finding some measure of peace in simpler pursuits. But that day was far off, and for the present they were content to reign as a team, forging a legacy that neither had dared imagine in their darkest years. One late autumn evening, Tyrion stood on the ramparts, watching the sky flare with the colors of sunset, orange, pink, and purple mirrored in the distant snows. He heard a rustle of skirts behind him and turned to see Sansa approaching, the wind teasing strands of her red hair from her braid. She came to stand beside him, folding her arms on the stone parapet. "It's beautiful," she remarked, gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is," Tyrion agreed, placing a hand over hers. "The North has a quiet grandeur." They stood that way for a while, letting the cool air wash over them. Below, in the courtyard, their children laughed as a nurse tried to herd them inside. Joanna was now old enough to lead Ned around by the hand, both of them chattering happily. Tyrion felt a tremor of joy, followed by a gentle wonder at how life could transform so completely. Sansa's voice turned reflective. "Sometimes I still can't believe we found this peace. That our marriage, once a horror forced on us by my enemies, became everything it is now." He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "It was the best thing either of us ever stumbled into, though it didn't feel that way at first." She smiled, lips curving in a mixture of amusement and gratitude. "No, it certainly didn't. But maybe that's how life works, Tyrion. We survive the worst, and sometimes, by the gods' grace, we discover something better than we ever thought possible." He touched her cheek gently. "You've taught me that, Sansa. Taught me that hope can bloom even in the harshest winter." The sun dipped lower, casting a final golden light across the battlements. Sansa looked at Tyrion, her eyes luminous. "And you taught me that not all Lannisters are monsters," she whispered, "that kindness can hide under the armor of wit and cynicism. You saved me from a lonely fate." He closed the small distance between them, pressing his lips to hers in a tender, lingering kiss, one that spoke of gratitude and love and the courage that bound them together. The wind ruffled their cloaks, the castle around them silent witness to the vow they had renewed 1,000 times in small ways, to stand as one, to protect what they had built, to cherish the family they had created. When they parted, the sky was nearly dark, a scattering of stars flickering to life overhead. Tyrion slipped his hand into hers. "Shall we go inside? Our children might wonder why their parents are out here in the cold." Sansa laughed softly. "Yes, let's." They descended the steps together, arm in arm, heading back into the warmth of the keep. In the corridor, the torches glowed and the walls bore tapestries of wolves and lions entwined, reminding all who passed that unlikely alliances could become enduring legacies. The future beckoned, uncertain yet filled with promise, and Tyrion knew that whatever lay ahead, be it small joys or great challenges, they would face it side by side. And so, Tyrion Lannister remained Lord of Winterfell, not merely by marriage but by the truest bonds of loyalty, respect, and love. The realm beyond would continue to shift, new players rising and falling, new alliances forming and breaking. But in the north, shaped by the unwavering spirit of House Stark and the unlikely devotion of a clever dwarf with a tender heart, a new generation grew strong within those ancient walls. The child of the wolf and the lion ran through Winterfell's courtyards, carrying forward a legacy of resilience and compassion. Winter would come, as it always did, but this time they would be ready. And in that enduring fortress of stone and snow, two souls who once stood on opposite ends of a cruel Game of Thrones found in each other not merely survival, but the warmth of a life shared, building a world where peace could flourish if only they nurtured it day by day. Thus the story continued, woven into the vast tapestry of Westeros, a testament that even in a land so often defined by bloodshed, hope could take root and love could grow where none had believed it possible. The years flowed on with the steady pulse of the seasons, bringing gradual change to both Winterfell and the wider realm. Though every passing day etched new stories into the tapestry of Westeros, the essential threads at the heart of Winterfell remained the same. Tyrion Lannister and Sansa Stark, united by marriage, continued to lead the North with careful wisdom. Their children, Joanna and Ned, grew through the unstoppable tumble of months and years, each new discovery and challenge molding them into distinct personalities who bore both the wolf's enduring spirit and the lion's fierce pride. Joanna soon turned 4, then 5, bounding about the castle halls with a warm curiosity that made even the sternest guard smile. Her hair remained that golden red hue, a perfect mingling of her parents' lineages. She spoke with surprising eloquence for her age, often mimicking the more formal phrases she heard from Tyrion or Sansa. She had an uncanny ability to observe people and glean small truths, though she channeled the curiosity into innocent questions that sometimes left lords and ladies disarmed. Everyone in Winterfell grew used to hearing her patter of steps racing across courtyards or glimpsed her perched atop a low barrel as she listened intently to traveling bards. At mealtimes, she would chatter on about new wonders she'd discovered in the Godwood or in the stables, as if every corner of Winterfell contained a secret waiting to be revealed. Neddy, or Eddard Tywin, to give him the full name that honored both families, was younger, quieter, but no less vibrant in his own way. He was a watchful child, dark-haired like his maternal grandfather had been. Ser Brienne joked that he stared at the world with the same keen focus she'd once seen in Sansa's father, always absorbing everything before deciding to speak. Tyrion teased that Ned possessed a little lion's pounce in him, for the boy would sometimes burst with unexpected energy and tackle tasks that seemed beyond his small frame. But whereas Joanna was quick to exclaim and run, Ned could spend hours with the castle dogs or perched on Brienne's knee, calm as a cat, taking in the hush of the yard. He showed an early fascination for animals, always wanting to feed them or study their behavior. More than once, the stablemaster found him trying to give treats to horses that were far too large, forcing a harried scramble to keep him out of harm's way. Amid the daily joys of parenting, Sansa and Tyrion never neglected their governance. Their partnership had become a smooth interplay of talents. Sansa maintained her presence as the face of the Stark legacy, inspiring loyalty and kinship among the great northern houses. Tyrion tended to the steady flow of letters, trade agreements, supply lines, and diplomatic correspondences that kept Winterfell both well-provisioned and well-informed. Thanks to his efforts, the old animosity toward the name Lannister had lessened enough that merchants from the Westerlands sometimes braved the treacherous road north, seeking to exchange their goods for northern resources. Many had never quite forgotten the wars and betrayals, but coin had a way of bridging gaps when guided by steady, fair leadership. The realm beyond the north, however, was never fully free of turmoil. In bits and pieces, reports arrived of the Iron Islands stirring with renewed ambition. Euron Greyjoy was long gone, but the islanders had a habit of electing new leaders just as belligerent. This time, it was a self-styled priest-king named Karen Pike, rumored to blend the old ways of the drowned god with a thirst for raids. He was said to be assembling ships and men from scattered islands, raising a loud call to take what is ours by right of blood and sea. While that might have threatened the western coasts more directly than the north, Tyrion remembered how swiftly trouble could spread if left unchecked. And if Karen Pike's fleets decided to circle up toward the Shivering Sea, White Harbor could once again be at risk. So the watchers on the northern coasts remained vigilant. Lord Manderley, renewed in strength after the pirate crisis had been quelled with the Vale's assistance, began quietly reinforcing White Harbor's walls and urging families along the coast to have evacuation plans. He also took advantage of new alliances to ensure that trade vessels had some measure of protection. Tyrion frequently exchanged letters with him, sometimes smiling ruefully at how times had changed. He, the Lannister dwarf who once had no authority beyond the coins in his pocket, was now a key figure in coordinating the safety of northern port towns. In King's Landing, the Child King was growing into adolescence, guided by a council that seemed perpetually locked in quiet power struggles. Rumors suggested the young monarch was overshadowed by court intrigues from the remains of House Targaryen loyalists and various southern lords vying for advantage. More than once, quiet entreaties reached Winterfell, entreaties for Sansa and Tyrion to come south and lend their voices to the council, or at least to keep the crown from tottering. They politely declined, each time citing pressing matters in the north. Tyrion knew very well that returning to King's Landing risked being sucked into the same web of politics that had nearly claimed his life so many times before. Nor did Sansa have any appetite for it. Winterfell was their seat, their refuge. Let the southern lords play their games without the Stark-Lannister pair stepping onto that particular stage. When Joanna was nearly 6 and Ned almost 4, Winterfell prepared to host a harvest feast that promised to be the largest in years. The harvest had been exceptionally bountiful thanks to mild weather and the improved roads that brought supplies and laborers together at key times. Sansa, wanting to show generosity to her bannermen, invited lords from as far as the rills and the mountains near the Three Sisters. Trestle tables were set up in the great hall, the banners of various northern houses hung with pride, and even a small group of veiled dignitaries arrived, renewing the ties that had saved White Harbor from pirates not long ago. On the eve of the feast, Tyrion surveyed the great hall with a flicker of satisfaction. Servants bustled to place centerpieces of late autumn flowers on the tables, while casks of ale from both the north and the vale were arrayed by the far wall. Sansa joined him, glancing around with an approving nod. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue wool embroidered with subtle designs of dire wolves. At her side, Joanna tugged impatiently at her hand. "Can I have a sweet cake now?" the girl pleaded. "I saw the cooks preparing dozens and they smelled so good." Sansa smoothed her daughter's hair. "Patience, my dear. Tomorrow at the feast, you can eat all the sweet cakes your little belly can manage. For now, it's almost bedtime." Joanna scrunched her nose in disappointment. Tyrion leaned down with a conspiratorial smile. "I'll sneak you one extra tomorrow if you promise me you'll go to bed on time tonight and not plague your mother with more demands." That perked the girl right up. She gave him a bright grin. "Yes, Papa, I promise." Then she scampered off to find the nurse who would guide her to her chamber, waving vigorously over her shoulder. "She's unstoppable," Sansa murmured with fond exasperation. "I sometimes see so much of my younger self in her, impatient, eager for treats, and enamored with anything sweet. But she has more sense than I did at her age, I think." Tyrion smiled wryly. "And a sharper tongue, perhaps. She'll have to learn caution eventually, but I'd rather see her spirited than cowering. She's safe to explore her curiosity here in Winterfell in ways that so many children of noble houses are not." They walked together, slowly circling the hall, eyes roving over the final touches. Outside, a mild drizzle pattered against the castle walls, heralding the slow fade of autumn. As they passed a row of newly painted shield crests representing minor houses, Tyrion's mind wandered to the significance of it all, the alliances, the families, the feasts. A fleeting memory of King's Landing arose, the stench, the tension, the never-ending crowd of schemers. This was so different. Winterfell felt like a place of honest effort and a tough but genuine sense of community. And it was home. The next day dawned gray but not unpleasantly cold. Sansa's steward directed the placement of tables in the courtyard for the common folk, while the great hall would house the lords, their families, and special guests. Jugglers, musicians, and a traveling puppet show had all arrived to entertain the crowds. By midday, the fortress buzzed with activity, the swirl of garments and laughter, the aroma of roasted meats and spiced cider wafting through the corridors. Tyrion greeted each lord as they entered, standing beside Sansa in the great hall, offering a smile or a quip of welcome. The usual array of northern faces came through. Lord Serwyn, stiff but polite, Lady Alice Mormont, looking as fierce as one might expect from a Bear Island woman, a retinue from House Glover, and lesser-known families who had risen or survived in the chaos of the war. From the Vale contingent arrived Ser Garrus Royce, a nephew of Lord Royce, with half a dozen knights and their retinue. They bore mild expressions of curiosity, for many had never traveled so far north before. Tyrion observed them with the practiced eye of a diplomat, memorizing who seemed at ease and who harbored hidden uncertainties. The feast itself was a swirl of color and sound. Minstrels played lively tunes, calling out old ballads that spoke of Stark legends and victories past. The long tables groaned under platters of venison, boar, goose, and fish from the White Knife, accompanied by heaps of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and a seemingly unending flow of ale and wine. Tyrion, with typical caution, limited his drink, determined to remain clear-headed during any political undercurrents that might surface. Sansa likewise sipped sparingly, reserving her focus for the guests. Joanna and Ned, seated near their parents for the early part of the evening, gazed wide-eyed at the pageantry. Joanna, bursting with excitement, practically bounced whenever a new dish was brought forth or a bard began singing. Ned observed more quietly, occasionally wrinkling his nose at the strong scents of ale and cooked meats. Each time Sansa glanced at them, a flicker of warmth crossed her features. Even though the feast was partly a political event, she was glad for them to see Winterfell so alive, so joyful. Eventually, once the children began to tire, a nurse ushered them away. Joanna resisted at first, wanting to see more, but a promise of a final sweet cake on the way to bed placated her. Tyrion watched them go with an affectionate sigh. Sansa caught his eye, and they shared a moment of unspoken pride in the family that had grown from such improbable circumstances. As the night wore on, the hall filled with toasts and cheer, old soldiers recounting war stories, new knights exchanging brags about their future ambitions. Tyrion navigated the crowd, taking time to speak with each group, gleaning small details about the state of their lands. Sometimes he offered a well-timed jest or a sympathetic ear. Often Sansa joined him, her presence a tangible reassurance to these northern lords. They had grown used to Tyrion's size and name. They respected him as a man of wit and fairness, but Sansa was still the bedrock. She reminded them of Ned Stark's quiet honor, tempered now by her own fierce experiences. Near the dais, Lady Alyce Mormont tapped her goblet against the table, catching Tyrion's attention. She was in conversation with Ser Garrus Royce, who looked intrigued by the formidable lady. Tyrion approached, curious to see what matter brought them together. Alyce looked up at his arrival. "Lord Tyrion," she said, voice bearing that typical Bear Island bluntness. "Ser Garrus here says the Vale might send an expedition to explore new trade routes along the eastern coast. They're fishing for ways to bypass some taxes in the south. Perhaps Bear Island can be a stop for their vessels if they circle around the top of Westeros. I told him we'd need your counsel before we decide anything." Ser Garrus gave a small bow. "We hear Bear Island's coasts are rich in fish and possibly minerals. If we can form a link between the Vale fleet and your island, we might open new maritime lanes. With White Harbor so well guarded, there could be profit for all." Tyrion considered. Indeed, forging a northern maritime route could be beneficial, especially if the Ironborn threatened the traditional shipping lanes to the west. But Bear Island was remote, its waters treacherous for outsiders. He stroked his chin. "It's an interesting prospect. The question is whether the Vale ships have the fortitude and knowledge to navigate your waters, my lady. Bear Island's coasts are not the easiest in Westeros." Alyce chuckled, a short, amused sound. "They're not. We have storms and reefs that would tear a novice crew apart. But if Ser Garrus invests in local guides and invests in the island's needs, repairs to our docks, or mutual defense pacts, then maybe we can talk." Garrus Royce nodded eagerly. "Yes, of course. We'd be willing to fund expansions to Bear Island's harbor facilities. We're looking at a longer-term route that could even connect to Eastwatch by the sea if the Night's Watch remains stable. Trade in dried fish and northern furs could then move south by water, bypassing the expensive land tolls of central Westeros." Tyrion found himself intrigued. This could help unify the North's maritime presence and strengthen ties with the Vale even further. Of course, we'd need to ensure that no unwelcome presence, namely the Ironborn, uses these routes to their advantage. A well-fortified Bear Island might be a key to controlling those waters. Alyce drank from her goblet, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "We'll need to talk more. Lord Tyrion, if you and Sansa can give your blessing, I'd consider it. But we won't sign anything that puts Bear Island at risk without guaranteed aid. My house may be small, but we don't bow easily to outsiders." Ser Garrus hastened to promise assistance while Tyrion nodded. "We'll arrange a proper discussion after the feast, perhaps tomorrow. We can't put pen to parchment amid all this merriment. Let's lay out the terms carefully. And if Bear Island and the Vale can come to an arrangement, Winterfell will support it." Alyce grunted in approval. Garrus's eyes gleamed with the excitement of forging an alliance that might earn him favor back in the Vale. Tyrion left them to discuss the details, weaving away to continue his rounds. Sometime later, as the feast showed signs of winding down, a hush began to ripple through the hall. People turned toward the dais where Sansa had risen. She lifted a hand, her voice carrying with practiced calm as she thanked the guests for coming, praised the harvest, and wished them safe travels home when the time came. She spoke of the North's unity, reminding everyone of how far they had come since the bleak days of war. Applause and cheers followed. At last, she turned to Tyrion, beckoning him forward. He stood beside her, noticing the slight flush in her cheeks. She still occasionally felt the weight of such public speeches. He offered a supportive smile. Sansa finished with a final toast, raising her goblet high. "To the bounty of the North and to the bonds we share. May our alliances bring us peace, prosperity, and the strength to face whatever storms may come." The throng of lords and ladies raised their cups in unison, echoing, "To the North!" Tyrion drank as well, scanning the faces of the crowd. He spotted true camaraderie in many eyes, though he knew some still harbored private schemes or resentments. That was the nature of nobility in Westeros. But compared to the lethal intrigues of King's Landing, these northern disputes felt almost honest by comparison. They would address them in time, with the tact and tenacity that had served them so far. Later, as the revelers trickled away in small groups, Tyrion and Sansa found themselves stepping outside for a moment of fresh air. The drizzle from earlier had ceased, leaving a sky dotted with faint stars. A crisp breeze ruffled Sansa's gown, and Tyrion drew her cloak closer around her shoulders. She offered him a grateful nod. The faint strains of music echoed from inside, where a few hardy souls still danced to the last songs of the night. Sansa breathed deeply. It's nights like these that remind me why we fought so hard for peace. To see the North gathered in celebration, from proud lords to the simplest peasants in the courtyard. It feels good, Tyrion. Feels right. He gently wrapped an arm around her waist. It does. I remember so many feasts at King's Landing that left me feeling hollow. Here, there's genuine fellowship beneath the politeness. Even if some come searching for advantage, at least we have the chance to shape alliances for something better than endless war. She leaned her head against him. Sometimes, I still think about that day we stood in the sept in King's Landing, forced to wed. It feels like a lifetime ago, a nightmare belonging to a different world. If I could whisper to that frightened girl I'd tell her there was hope, that the dwarf she feared might prove her greatest ally and friend. His voice softened. And I'd tell that jaded dwarf that the girl forced upon him would one day become the partner he never dared dream he could have. Fate is cruel, but perhaps not always unkind. She kissed his cheek, a gentle brush of lips that carried more warmth than any grand gesture could. Then, they turned and made their way back inside, toward the swirl of drifting guests and extinguishing torches, ready to close the feast with dignified farewells. In the days after the harvest celebration, Tyrion settled back into the pragmatic concerns of ruling. He met with Lady Alice Mormont and Ser Garris Royce to draft the beginnings of a maritime agreement. They hammered out the details over several sessions. The Vale would fund the construction of a better dock on Bear Island, supply a handful of ships for mutual defense, and Bear Island would allow the Vale vessels to dock free of certain fees, while also promising a portion of its fish trade. The arrangement still had many wrinkles to be ironed out, but it was a promising concept. Sansa approved it in principle, adding a caution that the waters near the island were as much a foe as any Ironborn if navigators weren't careful. Ser Garris left Winterfell brimming with plans to report to his superiors in the Vale, while Lady Alice, though gruff, seemed intrigued by the possibilities. As Tyrion walked her to the courtyard to bid her goodbye, she paused and glanced sidelong at him. "You're a clever one," she remarked bluntly. "I'll admit, when I first heard you were to be Lord of Winterfell, I spat with rage. Thought no good could come of a lion in the wolf's den. But you've done more for the North than half the lords born here." Tyrion dipped his head slightly. "I won't pretend all memories of Lannisters are forgotten, but I'm grateful you've given me a chance to prove my intentions." She grunted in what passed for an amiable tone. "Keep it that way. You've done right by Sansa, by the children, and by our people. I'll fight for you if it comes to it. But cross us or let any harm come to Sansa or the little ones." He lifted a hand. "You needn't finish that sentence, Lady Alice. We understand each other." Alice Mormont gave one sharp nod, swung onto her horse, and rode out of Winterfell with her small retinue, the Bear Island flags fluttering behind them. Tyrion watched them depart, feeling again that mingling of humility and pride at having secured another piece of the North's unity. Sansa joined him, slipping her hand into his. "She's not an easy person to impress. You should be proud." He allowed himself a small, self-deprecating smile. A dwarven lion impressing a bear. Westeros never lacks for improbable sights. They stood watching the riders fade into the distance until at last only the swirling dust remained. Then, with no pressing counsel for the day, they returned inside to see to their children. Time rolled on in quiet rhythms, each season bringing new tasks, new treaties. Old conflicts simmered in other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Dorne had internal succession issues. The Iron Islands tested their new leader's appetite for raids. The Crown introduced yet another tax that the North largely ignored. But these storms did not break on Winterfell's walls. Sansa and Tyrion navigated them with letters, courtesy, and well-chosen alliances. Together, they preserved their realm's peace, allowing Joanna and Ned to grow in relative safety, a rare gift in a land that had devoured so many childhoods. As Joanna entered her 8th year, a new ripple of curiosity passed through the North regarding the fate of Jon Snow. Tormund Giantsbane, in one of his infrequent southern visits, told rumors of a solitary man often sighted near the Frostfangs, always accompanied by a white direwolf. Some said he was on a quest, others that he simply wanted solitude. Sansa listened to Tormund's tales with quiet longing and acceptance. She had once tried sending ravens beyond the wall, but few messages ever returned. Perhaps Jon had left behind all illusions of a southern home. Still, she lit a candle in the godwood each time winter deepened, wishing her half-brother whatever peace he could find. Around this time, Arya reappeared as well. Word reached Winterfell one night that a lone figure on a swift horse was spotted approaching. The guards recognized her in an instant, though she wore plain leathers and bore more knives on her person than some knights did. Sansa and Tyrion, alerted to her arrival, met her in the courtyard. Arya dismounted, tossed the reins to a stable hand, and stretched as though she'd been riding for days. She wore a thin smile that spoke of weariness and suppressed relief. "Arya," Sansa breathed, stepping forward. She hesitated a moment, then embraced her sister. Arya returned the gesture, albeit stiffly at first, then with genuine warmth. "Been a while," Arya said, glancing around. "Winterfell looks busier each time I visit. You've turned it into something more than just a fortress, I think." Tyrion offered a cordial nod. "We do our best. The North is thriving under Sansa's care. We'd love to hear of your travels, though. Where have you been?" Arya shrugged, leading them inside so they could speak with some measure of comfort. "Everywhere, nowhere. The Riverlands, the Stormlands, even the edge of the Reach. I've hunted a few stray knights turned bandits, corrected some injustices. But I realized I was tired and wanted to see home again." Sansa smiled, slipping an arm around Arya's shoulders as they walked. "Well, you're always welcome here, no matter how often you come and go. Stay as long as you like. Let us give you a warm meal, a proper bed." Arya's gaze flicked to Tyrion. "And you, Lannister? Still lordly up here in the snow?" Tyrion's eyes sparkled with a hint of wry humor. "The snow suits me better than I expected, though it took me a while to learn which boots wouldn't freeze my toes off." Arya allowed a reluctant half-smile. "I see. And how are Sansa's lionwolf cubs?" Sansa's expression brightened. "They're well. Joanna is unstoppable, always exploring. Ned is quieter. He's in the kennels half the time, learning from the master of hounds. They'll be thrilled to see you." Arya did indeed spend time with the children over the following days, showing them simple knife tricks and telling them half-complete stories of her adventures. Joanna was entranced, peppering her aunt with questions. Arya obliged as best she could, though she remained guarded about certain experiences. Ned, on the other hand, seemed both awed and slightly wary. He was too young to understand the subtle tension that sometimes hovered around Arya, her aura of someone more comfortable with danger than domesticity. The sisters had long talks in Sansa's solar or strolling through the godwood, remembering their parents, their lost brothers, and the different paths they'd taken. Tyrion didn't intrude, though he was glad to see some measure of closeness returning. He knew the bond between them had been tested by tragedies far beyond their control. Arya rarely mentioned King's Landing, but a haunted look passed her face when she did. They had all been scarred there, in their own ways. After a fortnight, Arya announced she would move on, some rumor of a distant threat near the neck or a plan to check on Gendry, the blacksmith-turned-lord in the Stormlands. Tyrion couldn't quite parse her exact goals. Sansa, as always, tried to convince her to stay longer, but Arya merely said, "I have too much restless blood in me to linger. But I'll be back again. I promise." She bade affectionate farewells to the children, clasped forearms with Tyrion in a gesture of mutual respect, and was gone. Sansa watched her ride away with quiet acceptance, though Tyrion could tell it pained her to see her sister so unwilling to settle. Life returned to its steady pattern, days of governance, nights of quiet gatherings by the hearth, the hum of commerce and alliances forming in the background. Tyrion found unexpected pleasure in small routine tasks, a morning conversation with the steward about new supplies, a midday walk with Ned to check on the kennel pups, an evening reading session in the library with Joanna perched on his lap, enthralled by whatever story he chose to share. More and more, he realized that the daily joys of stable family life were as profound as any glory he might have once craved in the chaos of the capital. But peace never lasted forever in Westeros. Whispers reached Winterfell that the Iron Islands had indeed begun a campaign of raiding, focusing mostly on the westerly coastlines of the Reach and the Westerlands. A letter from Tyrion's old acquaintance Podrick Payne, now serving in some capacity near Lannisport, confirmed the rumors. House Lannister's old seat at Casterly Rock was threatened by small but constant seaborne attacks. In the letter, Podrick mentioned that the new king in King's Landing was slow to dispatch aid, preoccupied with troubles nearer the Crownlands. Lords around Lannisport sought help from any who would answer. Tyrion felt an uncomfortable twinge of obligation. Casterly Rock was no longer under his direct care. Indeed, he had only the murkiest ties to the Lannisters who might still dwell there, distant cousins who had survived the war. Yet the thought of the rock, once so imposing, being harassed by Ironborn stirred old memories. When he brought the matter to Sansa, she listened carefully, then regarded him with sympathetic understanding. "It's your birthright in a way," she said gently. "And many innocents live around Lannisport who don't deserve to be pillaged by the Ironborn. But do you want to intervene?" Her tone suggested that if he wished to stay out of it, she would support that choice. He sighed, rapping his fingers on the table. "My father is long dead, my siblings are gone or scattered. The Rock never embraced me. But you're right, there are people there who had no hand in the wars who simply want to live. If the crown is ignoring their pleas, perhaps we can at least offer advice or resources." Sansa nodded. "We might coordinate with the Vale again. They have warships. But the distance is great, and we'd have to sail around Dorne or through the Stepstones to reach Lannisport from the east. That's no small feat," she paused, considering. "Yet if we do nothing, the Ironborn grow bolder. We have alliances here we can't compromise by neglecting the threat of the Iron Islands. If Karen Pike sees success in the west, what stops him from turning east again?" Tyrion weighed the pros and cons. "We cannot spare a large northern force, not to march across the entire continent. But perhaps we can help raise some funds to hire a mercenary fleet or coordinate with the lords of the Westerlands. If they unify, they might repel the raids without needing direct troop involvement from Winterfell." They worked out a cautious plan. Tyrion would send letters to old associates near the Westerlands, Podrick, some lesser lords who might recall him with some goodwill, offering to broker contact with the Vale for a possible alliance at sea. The North itself would not dispatch many men, but it might provide archers or supplies if the fighting moved inland. Essentially, they would help from afar, using diplomatic ties and money rather than risking a long campaign. Joanna, overhearing bits of her parents' conversation, asked with wide eyes, "Will there be war again, Papa? Will the Ironborn come here?" Sansa knelt beside her daughter, explaining gently that the world was wide and the Ironborn mostly troubled places far from Winterfell. But if danger did appear in the north, she and Tyrion would protect everyone. Joanna looked solemn, as though trying to puzzle out how the grown-up world of raids and ships worked. In the months that followed, ravens flew back and forth, forging a chain of negotiation between the Vale's maritime captains and those of the Westerlands. House Lannister's lesser scions, desperate for relief, grudgingly thanked Tyrion for his efforts, though some did so only because they had no better alternative. The Vale agreed to lend part of its fleet for a limited time, enough to patrol the seas near Lannisport and deter Karen Pike's longships. In return, the Westerlands would provide the Vale with certain trade privileges in gold and silver, a deal hammered out by meticulous letters. Tyrion managed it all from his solar in Winterfell, orchestrating a surprising synergy that spanned half the realm. He sometimes marveled that he, once disdained by his father, might now be responsible for partially saving what remained of the old Lannister stronghold. Meanwhile, Sansa oversaw the North's internal affairs, ensuring that roads stayed safe, that the people had enough supplies, that the Watch on the Wall remained funded despite King's Landing's sporadic contributions. The arrival of each new season was greeted with practical measures instead of dread. No longer did they scramble to survive the chaos of war. They had grown adept at anticipating problems before they became crises. When winter began to creep upon them again, an inevitable cycle in the north, the temperature dropped and snow dusted the battlements of Winterfell. Joanna was nearly 10 by then, bright-eyed and perpetually in motion, full of questions about the world. Ned was 7, quietly devouring whatever new knowledge he could glean from the maester's lessons, especially those about animals and the natural environment. He and Joanna occasionally bickered in the way siblings do, but they shared a fierce loyalty. If any other child teased Ned about his quieter nature, Joanna came to his defense with a sharp tongue that none of the squires wished to challenge. Tyrion, witnessing this sibling solidarity, felt a pang of nostalgia for the relationship he had once shared with Jaime, a bond that had frayed under the weight of war and betrayal. One cold morning, a raven bearing the seal of Podrick Payne arrived. Tyrion opened the missive in his solar, Sansa standing beside him. The letter confirmed that the Vale fleet had reached Lannisport, driving off several Ironborn raids. Karen Pike's men had fled farther south, rumored to be near Old Town, though conflicting stories placed them near the Arbor. The immediate threat to the Westerlands seemed to have passed. Podrick's final lines read, "Though they won't say it openly, many in Lannisport and around Casterly Rock know that you orchestrated the help. The Vale captains speak of you with respect. If not for that alliance, we'd have been overrun. Even if House Lannister does not offer gratitude, the small folk here do. I remain in your debt." "My lord." Tyrion exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip from his shoulders. "It seems we've averted another crisis. For now, anyway." Sansa touched his arm, her voice gentle. "I'm glad. You did right by them, even if House Lannister isn't rushing to shower you with thanks." He offered a half-smile. I gave up hoping for applause from the Rock long ago. Doing the right thing was reason enough. She nodded, her eyes holding a tender understanding. Come, let's check on the children. Joanna insisted on practicing archery again. She's determined to prove she can outshoot any boy in the courtyard. Tyrion arched an eyebrow. She likely can with the proper teacher. Perhaps Ser Brienne can offer pointers. She'd have a knack for instructing a stubborn child on how to hold a bow. Sansa laughed, leading him out of the solar. Agreed. I'll ask her. They found the children in the courtyard, just as predicted. Joanna stood with a training bow sized for youth, loosing arrows at a straw target. Ned watched, seated on the fence near the kennels, occasionally shouting encouragement or advice. A pair of squires also looked on, smirking until Joanna nailed the center of the target with a neat thwack. Startled, they clapped with genuine surprise, and she gave them a triumphant grin. Ned hopped off the fence, ran to retrieve the arrows from the target, and handed them back to his sister, carefully avoiding the quivering tips. The two children shared a proud glance. Tyrion and Sansa looked on from a slight distance, content to let them relish the moment. Ser Brienne, leaning against a post near the armory, caught Tyrion's eye and gave a faint nod of approval at Joanna's technique. Moments like these reminded Tyrion why they worked so hard, why they navigated endless treaties, balanced budgets, and soothed tensions. They had carved out a sanctuary for their family and their people. Winterfell had survived conquest and flames, witnessed betrayals and heartbreak, but here it stood, a place of warmth and growth amid the perpetual threat of cold. Tyrion had not only become Lord of Winterfell by name but had settled into that role with a completeness that surprised even him. One evening, after supper, as the castle slept, Tyrion and Sansa lingered near the hearth in their chamber. The embers glowed low, painting flickers of orange light on the stone walls. Tyrion was reading an account of the northern clan's genealogies when Sansa set aside the sewing she'd been half-heartedly attempting and turned to him with a quiet question. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked softly. He lowered the book, meeting her gaze. "Enough?" She hesitated, fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve. "We've built peace here, shaped alliances. But sometimes I recall how my parents wanted so much for the North for us. I wonder if we should be looking toward the future more actively. Joanna is nearly old enough for betrothal talk. Ned won't be far behind. It feels like I blinked and they grew so fast." Tyrion marked his place in the book with a finger, thinking. "I've wondered the same. About forging a match for Joanna with a neighboring house, sealing a bond that outlasts us. But I also loathe the idea of forcing her into anything she doesn't choose. We lived that fate once." His expression darkened slightly at the memory of their coerced wedding. Sansa's eyes flashed with empathy. "I'd never do to her what was done to me. But in noble families, it's common to discuss options early, especially if we want to maintain or strengthen alliances. The Vale, the Riverlands, even the Stormlands might be open to a match one day." He nodded slowly. "We can gently open negotiations, see if there's interest, but keep it discreet. We have time. Joanna is only 10. I don't want her to sense we're plotting out her marriage behind her back." Sansa reached for his hand. "We won't. It will be different for her. She'll have a say, I promise." A weight lifted from Tyrion's chest and he squeezed her hand. "I know you'll ensure that. We can mention the possibility to some of our allies, but in a manner that respects her right to grow freely. She's so young, let her enjoy it a while longer." They lapsed into a thoughtful silence, each pondering the complexities of ensuring their daughter's freedom without neglecting the realities of highborn responsibilities. After a moment, Sansa lay her head on Tyrion's shoulder, and they found comfort in the hush. Sparks from the dying fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the rug. The future was a shifting tapestry of responsibilities and hopes, but they would face it together, just as they had from the start. Winter continued its inevitable deepening, the days shortening until dawn came late and dusk arrived early. Snow layered the courtyard. The children learned to skate on the frozen pools near the godwood, laughing with pink cheeks as they glided precariously. Tyrion and Sansa oversaw Winterfell's storehouses, ensuring that all had enough food to outlast the cold. Their caution from previous years paid off. There were no shortages and no harried appeals from outlying villages. The roads, though often blocked by drifts, were at least navigable enough for occasional patrols, keeping brigands at bay. In the midst of this hush, the next significant disruption arrived unexpectedly, a raven from the newly re-established House Tully in Riverrun. Edmure Tully, Sansa's uncle, had endured many travails but finally seemed to have carved out a stable rule. His letter brought an invitation. A grand tourney was to be held near Riverrun's fields to celebrate a newly rebuilt portion of the castle and to commemorate peace. He extended personal entreaties for Sansa and Tyrion to attend, suggesting it would be a symbolic gesture of unity. House Stark, the Guardians of the North coming south to join House Tully, reconnected at last. Sansa's initial reaction was one of cautious delight. She had fond memories of Riverrun, of family summers by the water when her mother would bring them to visit. The idea of returning under peaceful circumstances stirred her heart. Yet traveling south was never trivial, especially in the cold season. And Tyrion was not blind to potential hazards. Riverrun might be stable, but the roads between the Riverlands and the north were long, crossing territories still dotted with outlaws. They convened with their advisors. Ser Brienne offered to accompany them as a protector, a role she took seriously. Brienne also noted that the symbolic value of Sansa reuniting with her Tully kin could fortify alliances. The more houses that saw Stark Lannister traveling openly, the more they recognized that the realm was not splintered but interconnected. Tyrion considered the risk versus reward. Finally, after some debate, they decided it was worth the journey, provided the children remained safe in Winterfell. Joanna and Ned were told that their parents would be taking a trip. Joanna pouted at first, wanting to see the famed tours and grand pavilions of a southern tourney, but she relented when Sansa explained that it would be a difficult journey in the cold. She extracted a promise that her parents would bring back stories and perhaps a little token from Riverrun stands. Ned was more accepting, too busy with a new puppy the kennel master had entrusted him to train. Thus, one frosty morning, Tyrion and Sansa set out from Winterfell with a small but well-trained retinue. Ser Brienne rode at the head of the guards, her cloak bearing the sigil of House Stark, signifying her loyal service. The roads were indeed challenging in spots, and progress slowed. Yet Sansa's spirits remained high, heartened by the thought of seeing her uncle Edmure and reuniting, even briefly, with the Riverlands. Tyrion, bundled in furs, found the expedition both daunting and oddly exhilarating, a return to the days when he traveled widely across the land, except now he traveled with purpose and the security of a land that accepted his leadership. They stopped to key northern strongholds along the way. Last Hearth had new leadership after the wars, and they welcomed Sansa with open arms. Crossing the Neck proved a wet, swampy ordeal, but Howland Reed's people offered guidance and safety. The days stretched into weeks as they made their slow progress south, winter's chill following them in a wave. Still, the roads were passable enough. Eventually, they passed from the domain of the Neck into the Riverlands proper. The shift in terrain brought rolling hills, scattered farms, and winding rivers that glimmered under pale sunlight. Sansa's eyes shone with recognition. She recalled fleeting visits to these lands as a child. Tyrion watched her with quiet affection, knowing this journey reconnected her to a part of her family heritage. At last, the red stone walls of Riverrun rose into view, perched at the confluence of the Red Fork and the Tumblestone rivers. It was not as large or imposing as Winterfell, but it held a certain grace, the water shimmering around its fortress walls. Outside, the broad fields had been cleared of snow for the impending tourney, pavilions set up in bright colors. Pennants flapped in the wind. Sentries at the gate, seeing the Stark banners, ushered them in with respectful haste. The courtyard bustled with visitors from across the Riverlands and beyond, knights and lords bringing their retinues. Stable hands rushed to help with horses, while servants hurried to offer lodging. Word traveled swiftly through the fortress, and soon Edmure Tully himself emerged to greet them. He was older than Sansa remembered, his hair thinned and streaked with gray, but his face lit with unmistakable joy at the sight of his niece. "Sansa," he exclaimed, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "It's been too long. You're a woman grown now, the Lady of Winterfell. I never thought I'd see the day." He stepped back, taking her in with a watery smile. "You look so much like your mother." Sansa returned the smile, though tears pricked her eyes at the memory of Catelyn Stark. "Uncle Edmure, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for inviting us." Edmure turned to Tyrion next, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "Lord Tyrion Lannister," he paused, then smiled with genuine gratitude. "We owe you much for how you've helped maintain stability in the North and the Riverlands. And, as I understand, you were the prime mover behind certain trade routes that have benefited Riverrun as well. I'm grateful for your presence." Tyrion inclined his head. "Thank you, Lord Edmure. It's an honor to be here, especially under peaceful circumstances." Edmure signaled a servant to guide them to comfortable guest chambers, inviting them to rest and refresh themselves before the official festivities. The plan was for a grand opening feast that evening in Riverrun's Great Hall, followed by 3 days of jousting, archery, and melee contests in the fields. Sansa and Tyrion expressed polite enthusiasm, though Tyrion, as always, had little love for the flamboyance of jousts. Still, it promised to be a chance to meet lords from across the Riverlands, forging or renewing ties that could prove vital in uncertain times. Their assigned quarters were modest but tidy, the bed linens freshly laundered, the window overlooking a bend in the river. Sansa gazed out at the flowing waters, quiet memories dancing across her face. Tyrion set aside his traveling cloak and brushed off the dust. He stood behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You must have so many memories of this place," he said softly. She nodded, eyes misty. "I came here as a little girl with my mother. She was so happy to show me the rivers, the fish that jumped in the currents. She taught me the Tully words: family, duty, honor. I barely understood them then. Now they feel heavier." He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've honored them more than you know. If your mother were here, I have no doubt she'd be proud." Sansa turned to face him, offering a half-smile tinged with sadness. "Thank you." She kissed his cheek, then took a steadying breath. "We should dress for tonight's feast. I suspect Uncle Edmure will want a grand entrance with many formalities." "Of course," Tyrion replied, mustering a wry grin. "Let's not keep the Riverlands waiting." They took the next couple of hours to bathe and dress in the finest clothes they had brought. Sansa wore a gown of dusk gray trimmed with subtle Tully fish motifs along the sleeves, a nod to her maternal roots. Tyrion chose a dark doublet with silver thread, carefully pinned with the combined sigil of wolf and lion. Together, they made their way to Riverrun's great hall, Brienne a silent shadow at their flank, watchful of potential threats in unfamiliar territory. The hall was already filled with music, bright lanterns illuminating tables laden with bread, fish, and roasted meats. Tapestries depicting Tully heraldry lined the walls. Servants rushed about with pitchers of wine and ale, ensuring no cup went unfilled. Lords and ladies from nearby houses, Blackwood, Bracken, Fry Scions, Mallisters, mingled in carefully watched corners. Many heads turned at the sight of Sansa Stark Lannister, Lady of Winterfell, arm in arm with her husband, the dwarf who bore the Lannister name. Edmure greeted them at the dais, gesturing to seats of honor near his own. He had aged, but Tyrion spotted a certain contentment in the man's eyes, as though he had finally found peace after the war's ravages. Edmure led them through a round of introductions to other prominent lords. Each greeted them with at least surface-level courtesy. The warmth of some was genuine, House Mallister, for instance, who had harbored no ill will toward the Starks. Others, like the Blackwoods and Brackens, offered stiff politeness, their old feuds likely overshadowing any external alliances. Tyrion recognized that forging deeper ties here would require patience. At the table, they were served an array of Riverland's fare: fresh trout, eels and sauce, thick vegetable stews. Jesters performed near the center, and minstrels played ballads of the region's storied history. Sansa listened to a particular song about the trident with a distant gleam in her eyes. Tyrion let her have that moment, focusing on small talk with the lords seated nearby. Occasionally, he caught them casting curious looks at his stature, but any inclination to disrespect him was tempered by the knowledge that he was not merely a Lannister but the ally of the Lady of Winterfell. In the midst of the feast, Edmure rose for a formal welcome speech. He expressed gratitude for the presence of so many houses, praising the new era of cooperation. He singled out Sansa and Tyrion, commending them for their role in stabilizing the North and forging alliances that aided the Riverlands. Polite applause followed, and Tyrion politely inclined his head, though he never relished the spotlight. Sansa, with more grace, smiled serenely, drawing all the right gazes. After the feast ended, the hall emptied into smaller gatherings, some drifting to a nearby courtyard where braziers glowed under a starry sky. Tyrion noticed Sansa speaking with Edmure along a balcony overlooking the rushing waters. He decided to explore on his own for a moment, trusting that Sansa needed time with her uncle. He strolled through one of Riverrun's corridors, pausing to admire old tapestries depicting Tully legends: a massive fish in flight, a depiction of the Red Wedding's aftermath with House Tully's banners rising once more. Tyrion felt a shudder at the memory of that event, how it had torn the Starks and Tullis apart in one dreadful night. But this tapestry, likely new, showed a phoenix-like rebirth from tragedy. Perhaps that was the message Edmure wanted to convey. A soft voice behind him made him turn. It was Lady Lysara Blackwood, introduced earlier as a cousin to the main Blackwood line. She was young, perhaps a few years older than Joanna, with pale skin and dark hair. She inclined her head respectfully. "Lord Tyrion, I hope I'm not disturbing you." He gave a mild smile. "Not at all, my lady. Enjoying the tapestries?" She nodded, stepping closer. "They're fascinating. My family has a rivalry with the Brackens that spans centuries, so I'm always intrigued by how houses choose to depict conflicts in art." She paused, a note of curiosity in her gaze. "May I ask you something?" You were in King's Landing during the war, right? Tyrion tilted his head. I was. Her eyes flickered with hesitation. I heard stories, some about your role in the battle against Stannis, how you saved the city with wildfire, then were discarded by your family. Others said you turned on the Lannisters later. I'm just curious how much of it is true. He exhaled softly. Much of it is complicated. I did lead the defense of King's Landing once. Later, I found my family's methods untenable. The truth is rarely simple, especially where the Iron Throne is concerned. She studied him, a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. I see. My father always warned me about trusting the words of minstrels' songs or gossips. I suppose you must find it tiresome to correct everyone's assumptions. He shrugged, not unkindly. I've learned to let many assumptions remain. I prefer the North's more straightforward approach now. She offered a small, courteous bow. Then I'll leave you to enjoy the tapestry in peace. My apologies if I overstepped. Tyrion shook his head gently. No apology needed. Good evening, Lady Lysara. She drifted away down the corridor. Tyrion considered how odd it felt to represent a living piece of history. People who were children during the war had grown up hearing stories, half-truths. Some might see him as a hero, others a villain. He was neither, simply a man who had survived and found a place to do good. Returning to the hall, he found Sansa waiting. Conversation with Edmure concluded. She slipped her arm through his, guiding him out toward the courtyard for a bit of fresh air before retiring. They could hear the distant hum of late-night revelry from some corners, but most guests had retired. Sansa's cheeks glowed from the warmth inside, her eyes reflecting torchlight. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It's strange to be here, Tyrion. I feel Mother's absence keenly. But it's also comforting to see Edmure in better spirits. He's come a long way from the broken man I saw after the war. Tyrion nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. And you've come a long way from the frightened girl forced to live in King's Landing. Even if you feel the ache of memory, look at what you've accomplished, Sansa. You're a force in your own right. She sighed with contentment, letting the hush wrap around them. After a moment, she murmured, tomorrow is the first day of the tourney. Will you attend the justs or hide in the pavilions with your goblet of wine? He laughed quietly. I'll make an appearance, if only to demonstrate courtesy. Perhaps I'll even wager on a night or two. If the odds are in my favor, I might pay for new improvements to Winterfell's library. She smirked. That library grows daily under your hand. We'll need a second wing soon. We shall. Knowledge is never wasted, I assure you. Arm in arm, they returned to their quarters, the hush of night thick around them. Thus began their short sojourn in Riverrun, reuniting with family ties, meeting new lords, and stepping once more onto the southern stage, this time as equals, not pawns. The next day dawned bright, the sky a crisp blue above the riverlands. Tyrion and Sansa joined the throng heading to the tourney grounds. Colorful tents lined the edges of the field, each representing a knight or lord hoping to compete. Spectators gathered on wooden stands. Edmure presided from a central box, ensuring that his honored guests, Sansa and Tyrion, had seats of prominence. Banners snapped in the wind. The Tully Trout, the Stark Direwolf, the Mallister Eagle, the Blackwood Raven, the Bracken Horse, and lesser-known sigils as well. Trumpets sounded, and the jousting began with ceremonial passes. Tyrion watched as knights charged down the lists, lances splintering on shields. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Sansa observed with a composed excitement, clapping politely when a knight unhorsed his opponent. The Riverlands had once known such displays as preludes to battle, but for now the atmosphere was festive. Tucked away in the stands, Tyrion exchanged quips with some lesser lords who recognized his gift for witty remarks. By midday, the stands buzzed with talk of a particularly skilled knight who had unhorsed 3 opponents in a row. He bore plain armor with no sigil, calling himself the Knight of the Deep Waters, likely a romantic pseudonym for the tourney. Some speculated he might be a hedge knight. Others whispered he could be a younger son from a noble house wanting anonymity. Tyrion watched him carefully, noting the knight's fluid movements and subtle skill in controlling his horse. It reminded Tyrion of the first time he saw Jaime excel in a tourney. A pang of memory stirred in his gut. He pushed it aside, focusing on the present. After yet another victory for the Knight of the Deep Waters, the crowd roared with approval. Edmure turned to Sansa, half-joking. If he keeps this up, I may have to name him champion for the whole affair. Sansa replied with a faint smile. Perhaps. I'd like to know who's behind that visor first. Tyrion felt a nudge from behind. One of Edmure's attendants offered them both small cups of strong wine, helping them keep warm against the chill. They sipped, eyes locked on the field. Trumpets blared again. Another challenger approached, clad in black and white. The knight of the deep waters bowed politely, lowered his visor, and spurred forward. The horses thundered across the muddy ground. Lances met in a splintering crash. The black and white knight reeled, nearly unseated, but recovered at the last moment. The crowd gasped in delight. Tyrion found himself unexpectedly enthralled, something he rarely felt for jousting. This match was evenly contested. On the second pass, the black and white knight found his mark, striking the knight of the deep waters square in the breastplate. Bits of wood exploded. The mysterious knight wobbled but stayed on his horse. On the third pass, both knights angled for a decisive blow. The knight of the deep waters lowered his lance at the perfect moment, catching the other's shield and driving him out of the saddle. The black and white knight tumbled to the ground in a loud clatter, while cheers thundered from the stands. Sansa applauded, her eyes bright. "He's magnificent. Whoever he is, he rides like a master." Edmure stood, calling out to the field. "Well done, Knight of the Deep Waters. Reveal yourself and accept your due, or else claim your next challenger if you wish to continue." The knight circled his horse, slowing to a canter. He raised a hand as if to gesture for silence. The stands quieted in eager anticipation. Tyrion leaned forward, wondering if the knight would remove his helm. Instead, the knight merely lifted his visor halfway, showing only a hint of a face with an unreadable grin. Then he turned to face Sansa directly across the lists, raised his lance in salute, and cantered away to the far side of the field without a word. Sansa blinked, momentarily puzzled, and murmured, "Strange." Tyrion felt a prickle of unease, something about the knight's direct salute toward Sansa. But he told himself it was just the usual flourish of a victor hoping to impress a highborn lady. Perhaps the knight was starstruck by Winterfell's famous lady, or maybe it was a fleeting gesture of respect. In any case, the day wore on, the crowd abuzz about the Knight of the Deep Waters, who racked up victory after victory before retiring from the lists with no further reveal. That evening, a smaller feast took place in Riverrun's hall for the lords and knights who had participated. Tyrion drank sparingly, observing the swirl of excited talk about the day's justs. Sansa chatted with Edmure, who was in fine spirits, but she could not help glancing about to see if this mysterious knight appeared without his armor. If he did, no one recognized him. Later, in the privacy of their guest chamber, Sansa voiced her curiosity to Tyrion. "I wonder if we should ask Edmure to press for an identity. It's not unheard of for a knight to keep his name secret, but it's somewhat unusual to do so for the entire tourney." Tyrion shrugged, unfastening the clasp of his cloak. "Whoever it is, he's skilled, that much is certain. Some knights enjoy the mystique, hoping to make a dramatic reveal on the final day. If you want to press Edmure, we can, but I suspect it might be a source of entertainment for everyone to guess." Sansa sighed. "I suppose you're right. Let him have his mystery. We'll see how tomorrow's rounds go. For now, I'm far more tired than I expected from watching horses crash into each other all day." Tyrion chuckled softly, crossing to where she stood. He slipped a comforting arm around her. "Sleep, my lady. We'll endure another day of battered lances and ostentatious displays soon enough." Sansa let him guide her to the bed, each lost in their thoughts. The day had been full, leaving them both in need of rest. Tomorrow promised fresh intrigues, fresh encounters. They would handle them together as always. Morning arrived, and with it the second day of the tourney, this one focusing on archery contests and melee bouts. Sansa and Tyrion breakfasted with Edmure and a handful of local lords, then took their seats in the stands. Flags fluttered in a light breeze. Contestants took the field in a series of archery challenges, shooting at progressively smaller targets over increasing distances. Tyrion, remembering how keen an archer Bran Stark once aspired to be, felt a twinge of nostalgia. The North had changed so much since those early days of the war. The melee was next, a chaotic affair with armored men brandishing blunted weapons, trying to knock each other out of the ring. Ser Brienne stood by Sansa's side, occasionally critiquing the contestants under her breath, though she expressed no interest in entering. The Knight of the Deep Waters was nowhere to be seen among the archers or the melee participants, so the crowd shifted its conversation to other notable fighters. By late afternoon, the second day's events ended with a victor in the melee, one Ser Pelennor Hunt, a minor knight from the Trident region. Exhausted competitors limped away. Tyrion and Sansa congratulated the winners, thanked the participants, and returned to Riverrun's castle for another evening of merriment. This time, a smaller, more relaxed gathering took place in a courtyard pavilion lit by lanterns. There was dancing, wine, and soft music. Edmure hoped to lighten the mood after the day's rough spectacle. Sansa, feeling sociable, joined the dancing for a short while, though not in the arms of any suitor. She merely circled with some of the Riverlands ladies, enjoying the swirl of skirts. Tyrion stood aside, sipping a mild wine, content to watch. At some point, Edmure approached him with a conspiratorial grin. "Your lady is quite the dancer," he remarked. "But I recall hearing you once told King Joffrey you had 2 left feet?" Tyrion smirked. "For Joffrey, I might have claimed no feet at all, had it given me an excuse to avoid him. But yes, Sansa moves with a grace that I can't replicate. I'm happier as an observer." Edmure nodded, though he then switched to a more serious tone. "Tyrion, I wanted to speak with you about some Riverlands projects. Sansa told me how you oversaw the roads and trade expansions in the north. We have a plan to rebuild certain fords, maybe even reconstruct old watchtowers along the Trident. If you have a moment later, I'd value your input on cost projections." Tyrion gave a small bow. "Of course, I'm happy to help." Before the conversation could continue, a small flurry of activity at the edge of the courtyard drew their attention. A figure in dark, plain clothes stood there, quietly asking a servant something. The servant pointed toward Sansa. The figure stepped closer, removing a hood. Tyrion recognized him as the Knight of the Deep Waters, or at least the face from the partial reveal the day before. Younger than Tyrion had expected, perhaps in his early 20s, with dark hair and a proud tilt to his chin. Approaching Sansa, he bowed low. "Lady Stark," he said in a polite tone, "pardon my intrusion. I wish to pay my respects." Sansa, pausing from the dance, turned. She offered a measured nod. "The Knight of the Deep Waters, I presume. We wondered if you would remain incognito, but I see you've chosen otherwise." He lifted his eyes to hers. "I realized it might be rude to claim so many victories without at least acknowledging the presence of the realm's notable lords and ladies. My name is Ser Miles Rivers. I took on the Deep Waters moniker for personal reasons, but I see no harm now in revealing myself." Sansa's gaze flicked over him, noting the surname Rivers, bastard-born of the Riverlands. "Well met, Ser Miles Rivers. Congratulations on your jousting success." Tyrion and Edmure approached, curious. Ser Miles gave them each a polite bow. "Lord Tully, Lord Tyrion, your reputations precede you." Edmure studied him. "Rivers, you say? Which house are you kin to?" Miles gave a tight shrug. "I was told my father was a Bracken, but he acknowledged me only enough to give me resources for training. I hold no claim on that house. I make my own way, traveling to tournaments." Edmure nodded slowly, seeming to accept that. "We welcome all loyal knights to this event. You ride well, Ser Miles. If you continue tomorrow, you may well unseat the final challengers and claim the champion's purse." Miles inclined his head. "That would be an honor, my lord." Then he turned again to Sansa, something oddly intense in his expression. "Lady Stark, I grew up on tales of Ned Stark's honor, of how the Starks protected the realm from darkness. Seeing you here, having carved out peace in the north, is inspiring. I wanted to say so, humbly." Sansa seemed taken aback by the personal praise. "That is kind of you, sir. But my father's legacy is not mine alone to bear. Many have helped rebuild the north." Miles's gaze flicked briefly to Tyrion, then back to Sansa. "Still, your leadership stands out, my lady." His voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "There are those of us who see how the 7 kingdoms have changed. New alliances, new families rising. We admire those with the courage to forge peace." Edmure cleared his throat lightly, perhaps sensing some tension. "Well, Ser Miles, you'll have more chance to prove your skill tomorrow. We look forward to seeing the final tilt if you choose to ride." Miles bowed once more. Then I won't keep you further. Enjoy the evening. He stepped away, disappearing into the milling crowd. Sansa exhaled, trading glances with Tyrion. He's earnest, she observed, frowning a bit. Perhaps a bit too earnest. Tyrion shrugged. Bastard knights often have something to prove. Perhaps he's simply enthralled by your reputation. I wouldn't read too much into it. Edmure half grinned. As long as he doesn't cause trouble, I see no harm. Let's enjoy the night. Tyrion nodded, though some small prickle of caution lingered in the back of his mind. Ser Miles Rivers was proficient, polite, and apparently revered Sansa's house. Yet Tyrion had learned never to dismiss the power of hidden agendas, especially in a realm as unsettled as Westeros. Time would tell if Ser Miles was more than he appeared. That night passed uneventfully. On the final day of the tourney, the much-anticipated conclusion of the justs arrived. A handful of knights remained in the lists, competing in an elimination bracket. Predictably, Ser Miles Rivers bested each opponent with almost surgical precision, culminating in a final tilt against Ser Pelennor Hunt, the victor of the melee. The crowd hummed with excitement. Edmure allowed himself a small grin, enjoying the spectacle. Tyrion and Sansa watched from the stands, the winter sun reflecting on polished armor below. The horns blew, the horses charged. On the first pass, both knights struck shields, but no one fell. On the second, Ser Miles's lance shattered against Pellennor's chestplate, nearly unseating him. Pelennor wobbled but stayed mounted. The crowd cheered, enthralled. On the third pass, Pelennor angled for a desperate strike, but Miles knocked his lance aside and drove a precise blow into Pellennor's helm, sending the bigger knight crashing to the ground. Gasps rose, followed by thunderous applause. Ser Miles Rivers had emerged champion. Edmure stood, proclaiming him the victor of Riverrun's tourney, awarding him a purse of silver stags and the champion's wreath. Miles, sweat-soaked and breathing heavily, dismounted and knelt to receive the wreath. Applause roared through the stands. Then Miles turned toward the box where Edmure, Sansa, and Tyrion sat. He raised his visor fully, revealing a triumphant grin, and declared in a clear voice, "My lords, my ladies, as Victor I asked the favor of the Lady of Winterfell, Sansa Stark Lannister. Let me dedicate this victory to her name, a symbol of renewed bonds in the realm." A hush fell. Edmure threw Sansa a questioning glance, unsure if she welcomed such attention. Sansa, poised in her seat, felt every eye upon her. Tyrion watched her face. She had been taught from a young age how to handle such public gestures of courtesy. She rose, letting her voice carry with gentle grace. "Ser Miles Rivers, you have shown great skill and honor. I accept your dedication with gratitude. May your deeds inspire goodwill across these lands." She inclined her head, a diplomatic acknowledgement. Miles bowed low, his expression shining with fervor. "Thank you, my lady. You do me a great honor." He rose, allowing the field's attendants to lead him away, presumably to remove his armor and rest. The crowd erupted in cheers again, some chanting his name, while others cast curious glances at Sansa, wondering what might lie behind this gesture. When Sansa resumed her seat, Edmure leaned in, muttering under his breath, "Well handled." The crowd eats this chivalry up, though I'll admit his admiration borders on adoration. Sansa forced a light laugh. "Yes, well, I learned how to navigate flattery long ago." "Thank you for the prompt awarding of the purse, uncle." Tyrion sensed her tension. He placed a discreet hand on her arm, letting her feel his reassuring presence. She glanced at him, lips pressing into a faint smile. The rest of the ceremony played out. Edmure thanked all participants, distributed smaller prizes, and declared the tourney concluded. The stands began emptying. Tyrion and Sansa stepped down, weaving through the press of departing guests. Some paused to offer final greetings or ask for a word of counsel. They addressed them politely, edging toward the exit. At the far side of the field, Tyrion glimpsed Ser Miles once more, now unhelmed, engaged in conversation with a group of lesser knights. When he spotted Sansa and Tyrion passing, he gave a half-bow from a distance. Tyrion responded with a curt nod, while Sansa offered a neutral smile. They continued on, determined to keep the moment from overshadowing the real reason they had come, to reaffirm the North's connection to the Tully seat. That evening brought the final feast, a more subdued affair than the first. Many knights had departed already, eager to chase the next event or return to their liege lords. Sansa and Tyrion dined with Edmure, discussing the possibility of more joint trade routes between Riverrun and White Harbor. Ser Brienne joined them, though she mostly listened, occasionally offering practical input on which roads were safer for merchants. The atmosphere was cordial, and Tyrion allowed himself to think that perhaps this trip had achieved its purpose, forging stronger ties with the Riverlands while paying homage to Sansa's maternal lineage. Still, as they retired to their chambers, Sansa showed a small frown. Tyrion helped her undo the intricate braids in her hair, noticing her faraway look. Softly, he asked, "Does something trouble you?" She sighed, allowing the last braid to slip free. "I can't quite place it. Perhaps it's just old memories stirring. Or maybe it's Ser Miles's persistent admiration. It feels intense. I'm not sure why it unsettles me. I've had knights dedicate victories to me before. Joffrey once forced that scenario on me, but that was a long time ago." Tyrion recalled how Joffrey had used public gestures to humiliate Sansa. Perhaps that was part of her unease. But Miles Rivers hadn't displayed cruelty, only irreverent admiration. He might just be a well-meaning young knight with illusions of courtly romance, Tyrion offered gently. "You've become a legendary figure in some corners of the realm, Sansa. The Stark who survived the Lannisters, the lady who brought peace to the north. It's not surprising that some are enthralled." She exhaled, eyes shut. "You're right. I'm likely reading too much into it. Let's not dwell. Tomorrow we'll have a final talk with Uncle Edmure about trade matters, then depart for home. I miss Joanna and Ned." Tyrion smiled softly. "They'll be eager to have us back. If we ride swiftly, we'll spare ourselves too much winter travel." Sansa leaned into him, finding solace in his warmth. "Yes. Let's get some rest. I want to be gone by midday tomorrow." They slept as well as they could in the foreign bed, lulled by the soft rush of the rivers below. Morning arrived and they rose early, eager to settle their business. Edmure greeted them in a small solar where they pored over a map of the Trident. They discussed specifics for shipping goods upriver to White Harbor, possibly even tying in with new roads in the neck. Tyrion's mind hummed with calculations, while Sansa ensured the agreements supported mutual interests. After an hour, they concluded with handshakes and the promise that official documents would follow by Raven. They were nearly ready to depart when a servant approached with a note. Sansa opened it, reading the contents with a quizzical furrow in her brow. Then she passed it to Tyrion. It read, "Lady Stark, I beg a moment of your time before you depart, near the riverside orchard. I would speak of matters close to my heart. Ser Miles Rivers." Tyrion frowned. He must want a final flourish. Perhaps he's hoping for your blessing to become a sworn shield or some such. He looked to Sansa. "Are you inclined to meet him?" She pursed her lips. "I suppose I can grant him a minute if only to avoid a slight. But I prefer not to linger." She shot Tyrion a meaningful look, silently asking him to accompany her. He nodded and they excused themselves from Edmure, who was busy signing parchments with his steward. They made their way to the orchard near the river, a small grove of bare trees that would blossom in spring. The ground was damp from melted frost and the river's flow was audible nearby. As they approached, they spotted Ser Miles leaning against a trunk, arms folded. He straightened upon seeing them, surprise flickering across his face when Tyrion appeared alongside Sansa. He likely hadn't expected her husband to accompany her. "Ser Miles," Sansa greeted coolly. "You wished a moment of my time?" Miles bowed deeply. "Yes, my lady and my lord," he added belatedly to Tyrion. "I hope I haven't caused offense by requesting this meeting." Tyrion kept his expression neutral. "No offense, sir, but we are pressed for time. Speak your mind quickly." Miles swallowed, gaze briefly dropping to the damp grass. "I want to offer my sword to Lady Stark's service. I admire all she stands for: duty, honor, resilience. I've spent my life as a wandering knight, but I yearn for a cause worthy of my devotion. The North calls to me, my lady. Your legacy calls to me." Sansa blinked, not expecting such a direct proposition. "That is quite the declaration. But we have no immediate need of more knights at Winterfell, Ser Miles. And you are from the Riverlands. Would you not be out of place so far north?" Miles's eyes shone with fervor. "I've heard stories of your court, how it values skill over lineage, how you protect small folk. My status as a bastard might matter less in the north. I beg you to consider it. Let me be your sworn man, or at least let me earn your favor." Tyrion stepped in, voice calm but firm. "Ser Miles, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but Lady Stark does not simply accept new knights on the basis of flattery. What do you truly seek? A position, coin, renown?" Miles shook his head vehemently. "No, not coin. I have my purse from the tourney. It's a home I want, a purpose. The war stripped me of illusions about my father's house. The Lannisters and Boltons taught me how cruelty devours the realm. But Lady Stark and you, Lord Tyrion, overcame that cruelty. I wish to follow you." Sansa studied him in silence for a moment. The orchard was quiet, the distant swirl of river the only sound. She considered the earnest light in his eyes. "Our household guard is not lacking. If you want to prove yourself, you might travel north and speak with our master-at-arms, but I can't guarantee a place. I won't invite you blindly to Winterfell." He exhaled in relief, as though even that tentative possibility was a victory. "Thank you, my lady." I will do just that. He paused, hesitating. May I hope to serve you personally, to take an oath of loyalty as your sworn shield someday? Sansa's gaze hardened slightly. I already have a sworn shield. Brienne of Tarth is a knight of impeccable loyalty. Others in Winterfell guard our halls, men and women who've proven their devotion for years. I do not lack for protectors. If you seek to join, you'll start as any new recruit does, earning trust. Do you understand? Miles's face flickered with something like disappointment, but he bowed his head. I understand. I will do as you say, earn trust, and perhaps in time, he let the words trail off. Tyrion cleared his throat, encouraging the conversation to end. We wish you luck, Ser Miles. If you do journey north, be mindful, the cold does not forgive weakness. Miles stepped back, bowing once again. Thank you, Lord Tyrion. Lady Stark, you have given me hope. Without further ado, he turned, heading off among the trees, presumably to gather his belongings. Sansa let out a soft sigh. That man's intensity sets me on edge, though I can't pinpoint any malice in him. Tyrion offered his arm. If he truly follows us to Winterfell, we'll see what he's made of. Otherwise, perhaps this is the last we'll hear from him. Sansa nodded, her expression thoughtful. Let's go, Tyrion. We've tarried enough. They returned to Riverrun proper, collected their retinue, and took their leave of Edmure with many cordial farewells. The journey north beckoned, a long road ahead, but both felt the pull of home. Riverrun had been a reminder of old roots and new alliances, but Winterfell was where their hearts rested. The trek back took several weeks, with stops at minor keeps for shelter. They encountered few troubles, aside from occasional deep snow or frozen marshland near the neck. Ser Miles Rivers was nowhere in sight, so Tyrion assumed he must have chosen a different route or decided against traveling north in winter. Sansa didn't mention him often, but Tyrion saw an occasional flicker of reflection in her eyes, as though she weighed the knight's fervent devotion and found it unsettling. At last, Winterfell's walls came into view, bringing a swell of relief. Joanna and Ned ran out to greet their parents in the courtyard, wrapping Sansa and Tyrion in excited hugs. The warmth of those embraces banished any lingering chill from the road. Tyrion pressed kisses to both children's hair, marveling anew at how precious their presence was in his life. Sansa, rubbing Joanna's back, said softly, "We're home." And indeed, for all the pageantry and politics south of the neck, for all the glimpses of Tully tradition and Riverland's splendor, Winterfell stood as the anchor of their existence. Tyrion looked over the familiar towers and walls, the stable boys rushing to take their horses, the swirl of guards offering salutes. The air was bracing, the sky a crisp gray. It was good to be back, where they were not visitors but guardians, where their children thrived under the watchful eyes of loyal men and women. They settled into the rhythm of daily governance once more. Letters arrived from Edmure, thanking them for their presence and confirming new trade proposals. Tyrion answered with courtesy. Sansa resumed her seat in the great hall, holding small councils with her advisors. The winter pressed on, but the storehouses were well stocked, and no pressing crisis demanded immediate fear. Yet, as weeks turned to months, a persistent rumor began circulating around the courtyard. A knight from the south had arrived in the outskirts of the Wolfswood, inquiring about the way to Winterfell. Some said he was traveling alone. Others reported he had a squire or two. Bit by bit, the rumor expanded. By the time Tyrion and Sansa caught wind of it from the steward, they exchanged knowing looks. It seems Ser Miles Rivers may not have been dissuaded by the cold, Tyrion remarked dryly. Sansa let out a long breath. So it seems. I said I would not turn him away if he wished to join our ranks. But I can't say I relish the thought of dealing with his fervor day by day. Tyrion patted her hand. We'll see how he fares. If he can endure the regimen here, if he can prove himself without causing undue drama, perhaps he'll be no more than another sword seeking honest service. Sansa nodded, though a pensive shadow lingered in her gaze. She recalled all too well how unbridled admiration could morph into something dangerous in a land rife with secrets. Still, House Stark had always prided itself on fairness. They would give the man a chance, if he survived the harsh northern roads. Sure enough, not a fortnight later, a visitor appeared at Winterfell's gates, half frozen from the journey, accompanied by a single squire. It was Sir Miles Rivers, his horse gaunt with exhaustion. The guards let him in, directing him to the master-at-arms and informing him he would begin as any newcomer would. Stabling his own horse, helping with chores, and waiting for an audience with the Lady of Winterfell once he'd proven he could handle the discipline. Sansa, upon hearing of his arrival, decided not to summon him immediately. She wanted to see how he adapted to menial tasks, how he interacted with the other recruits. Tyrion stood by her decision, content to watch events unfold. If Sir Miles was true to his word, seeking honest service, he would adapt. If he chafed at the duties assigned him, he would reveal his colors soon enough. Days slipped by. The courtyard lay thick with snowdrifts, and men who trained in the yard cursed the biting wind. Sir Miles pitched in, carrying feed, assisting the blacksmith in small tasks, even shoveling snow alongside lower-ranked men. Some grumbled about the southern bastard knight, but others warmed to him when they saw his willingness to work without complaint. The master-at-arms observed him with a wary eye, eventually allowing him to join training sessions. Word of his skill on the practice field spread quickly. He disarmed seasoned fighters with ease, maintaining a respectful demeanor yet clearly outmatching many. Some of the younger guards marveled at his technique, claiming they'd never seen such a fluid style. Tyrion, hearing these tales, felt a flicker of concern. A man that adept might become a threat if his intentions soured. At last, after a couple of weeks, Sansa permitted Sir Miles to appear in the Great Hall for a formal acknowledgement of his presence. Tyrion stood at her side as she sat on the wooden seat that served as her symbolic throne. Sir Miles approached, wearing a thick cloak over his simpler armor. He knelt, lowering his gaze. "My lady, I have done as you asked. Proven I will labor as any other. May I now swear my sword to House Stark?" Sansa regarded him, expression calm. "I've received reports of your diligence. You've shown skill and courtesy, but to swear your sword means you must abide by our laws, our ways. Winterfell is not the South. Our first loyalty is to our people, not to feudal pomp or personal glory. Do you accept this fully?" His eyes lifted, meeting hers with reverence. "I do, my lady. Fully. Let me serve." She inclined her head. "Very well. Then swear your oath." He placed a hand over his heart, voice resonant in the hush of the hall. "I, Miles Rivers, swear by the old gods and the new to serve Lady Sansa Stark and Lord Tyrion Lannister of Winterfell, to protect the people under their care, to keep faith with House Stark, and to defend the North against all enemies so long as I draw breath." Sansa nodded solemnly. "Then rise, Sir Miles Rivers, as a sworn sword of Winterfell. May your deeds match your words." He rose, face alive with emotion. Applause came from a few of the onlookers, some curious, some genuinely supportive. Tyrion offered a polite inclination of his head, though he remained vigilant. A man's vow was one thing, how he lived it was another. From that day onward, Sir Miles became a regular presence in Winterfell. He trained daily, patrolled the grounds, and seemed eager to learn the northern ways. He expressed fascination with the Godwood, spending quiet moments there as though attempting to connect with the land. Some of the older guards teased him for his wide-eyed reverence. Others, noticing his sincerity, took him under their wing. Sansa was polite in her interactions with him, never fully relaxing but not discouraging him from performing his duties. At times, Tyrion caught glimpses of Miles watching Sansa with an intensity that unsettled him. Yet the knight never crossed lines, never made improper gestures or remarks. He was always respectful, addressing her with formal courtesy. For her part, Sansa responded in kind, showing the measured distance that any liege lady might show to a retainer. The tension was subtle, but Tyrion felt it all the same. Joanna and Ned, curious about the newcomer, asked questions. "Why did Sir Miles come all the way from the Riverlands, Mama? Doesn't he miss home?" Sansa explained gently that some people sought a better life in the north, and Sir Miles was one of them. She advised them to treat him politely, but not to give him any special trust until he had earned it fully. As the winter months wore on, Miles continued proving himself. He helped repel a small group of bandits who strayed near the outskirts of Winterfell, showing bravery and protecting younger guards in the skirmish. The Master-at-Arms praised his leadership. Tyrion, hearing the tale, acknowledged the knight's prowess. "He may be earnest, but he's certainly no coward," Tyrion admitted to Sansa. She agreed softly. "Perhaps in time he'll simply be another loyal guard, and my unease will fade." Yet a subtle undercurrent lingered. Miles's admiration for Sansa never manifested in anything overtly inappropriate, but Tyrion could sense that the knight saw her as more than just his liege. Whether it was romantic infatuation or deep reverence, Tyrion couldn't be certain. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Tyrion found Miles in the courtyard, practicing sword forms under torchlight. The yard was mostly empty, snow piled against the walls. Tyrion approached slowly, his boots crunching in the powder, and Miles paused his drill, turning with a respectful bow. "My lord," he said, sheathing his sword. "I didn't hear you approach." Tyrion nodded, stepping closer. "You train late. Dedication or insomnia?" A faint smile touched Miles's lips. "Dedication, I suppose. The cold nights keep me sharp. I want to be ready if danger ever comes to Winterfell." Tyrion studied him, the torchlight revealing the lines of focus on his face. A noble sentiment. The North can always use men who care about protecting it. Miles shifted slightly. "I do care. More than you know." He hesitated, then ventured quietly. "I sense you're wary of me, Lord Tyrion. Forgive me if I've given reason for mistrust." Tyrion weighed his response carefully. "You traveled far to pledge yourself to us. Forgive me if I wonder at your deeper motivations. Loyalty is commendable, but sometimes men are driven by desires they themselves don't fully grasp." Miles looked away, exhaling. "I can't deny I admire Lady Stark. Who wouldn't? She's everything the songs say. Strong, wise, compassionate. But I know my place. I've sworn to protect her and this castle, nothing more. If my admiration unsettles you, I can only strive to show through my actions that I mean no harm." Tyrion's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do that, then. Focus on your duties, not on illusions. Lady Stark is happily wed, mother to 2 children, and the revered leader of the North. She deserves respect without complications." Miles bowed his head. "Yes, my lord. I understand." Tyrion nodded curtly, stepping back. "Good night, Sir Miles. Keep your sword arm strong, for the North has a way of testing a man's resolve." With that, Tyrion turned and headed inside, leaving Miles in the flickering torchlight. The conversation played over in Tyrion's mind as he ascended the steps to his solar. The night had not been hostile or defensive, yet Tyrion's instincts warned him that unrequited admiration could breed complications. Still, he couldn't banish a man for harboring silent affection, so long as no lines were crossed. Sansa listened to Tyrion's account when he shared it, her eyes darkening with concern. But she admitted there was little to be done except maintain the boundaries they had set. Miles was a sworn sword now. If he chose to remain loyal and keep his personal feelings at bay, they would treat him fairly. If not, consequences would follow. Fortunately, in the months that followed, Miles Rivers seemed to settle into the rhythms of Winterfell, forging friendships with other knights and earning a measure of genuine respect. He remained steadfast in his duties, never again approaching Sansa with anything that resembled a personal entreaty. He was seen helping Ned learn the basic stances of swordsmanship, speaking politely about the code of chivalry. Joanna was less interested in such things, preferring archery and reading, but Miles praised her skill in the yard without hint of condescension. Sansa gradually relaxed. Tyrion, too, found himself nodding occasionally when hearing how Miles led patrols or volunteered for harsh assignments in the snows beyond the castle walls. Perhaps the young knight had truly found a place to anchor his restless spirit, adopting the North as his new home. If so, it spoke to how far Winterfell had come, a place that welcomed even a wandering bastard with open arms, provided he upheld its values. The children grew older. Joanna approached her 12th name day, Ned his 9th. Sansa and Tyrion occasionally broached the topic of potential betrothals for Joanna, though they moved with caution. A hush fell between them whenever the conversation turned to the memory of how Sansa's own betrothal had been weaponized. They agreed to let Joanna have a voice in any discussions, waiting until she was old enough to understand. Meanwhile, Ned devoured every scrap of knowledge about animals, scribbling his own observations on scraps of parchment. The maester predicted he might follow a scholarly path, but Ned insisted he also wanted to be a strong warrior for Winterfell. Sansa teased that perhaps he would be a warrior maester, an entirely new concept. Another year passed in relative peace. The crops grew well in the northern fields. White Harbor's trade routes thrived. Rumors about the Iron Islands had quieted somewhat, though no one doubted their potential for future mayhem. The crown in King's Landing remained distant, sending only the occasional raven with tax edicts that the North largely negotiated down. Riverrun reported stable times. The Vale, too, maintained good relations. Tyrion and Sansa had never known a period of such prolonged calm in their lifetimes. Yet, as they well knew, Westeros could shift like quicksand. In the quiet margins of every peaceful era, seeds of unrest might take root. Tyrion occasionally felt the old tingle of anxiety that something would disrupt this harmony. But each day that dawned in Winterfell, with the children safe and laughter echoing in the courtyard, was a gift he would not take for granted. He and Sansa walked the ramparts, often overlooking the land that was theirs to protect. Sometimes the watchtowers jutted into a swirling mist, a reminder of the North's untamed majesty. And each time, Tyrion recalled the vow he had made on that first fateful arrival. He would do all in his power to guard this place, to stand beside Sansa Stark as her partner, forging a better tomorrow. Against all odds, they had done it. And as far as he was concerned, they would continue doing it for as long as they both drew breath, side by side in the ancient stronghold that had accepted the dwarf lion as one of its own and welcomed his children as part of the wolf's proud lineage. Such was the legacy they tended. Tyrion Lannister, once the outcast imp, now Lord of Winterfell through marriage and through the love he had nurtured for both the land and its lady. The tapestry of their lives stretched on, each thread woven with hard-won perseverance, quiet hope, and the undying promise that winter might come, but the fires they lit together would guide them through the cold. And so, in the frosted spires of the North, the improbable marriage that began as a cruel jest in King's Landing blossomed into a story of unity and devotion, one that defied all cynicism and proved that even in a realm scarred by blood, new life could flourish, generation by generation, under the watchful eyes of wolf and lion alike.